Hey guys, tonight we are embarking on a journey so far back in time that the very stones beneath our imaginary feet whisper of forgotten languages and lost beliefs. We're heading to the sun-baked plains of the ancient Indus Valley, to the enigmatic cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro more than 4,000 years ago. Picture yourself amidst orderly streets of baked brick houses, the air filled with the distant sounds of artisans and the murmur of a language we can no longer understand. Tonight, we're trying to glimpse how these remarkable Bronze Age people might have guarded new life, exploring the strange, reconstructed rituals and the possibly forbidden things surrounding the arrival of their babies. Now imagine trying to successfully raise an infant in Harappa around 2500 BC without a single decipherable parenting manual to your name, because they inconveniently forgot to leave one we can actually read. You'd be relying on what we think might have been their beliefs about good luck charms, ritual purity, and things you definitely shouldn't let a baby teeth on. Your chances of accidentally offending a minor household deity with an incorrectly placed amulet or misinterpreting a sacred mud brick pattern as a convenient diaper-changing station would be, let's just say, impressively if unintentionally high. It was undoubtedly a world of fascinating, if now deeply enigmatic childcare. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to hear where you're drifting off from tonight and what the weather's like in your part of the world. Drop it in the comments. It's always wonderful to connect across time and space. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself at Jeria transported not to the familiar landscapes of Europe or the Near East this time, but to the fertile floodplains of the mighty Indus River and its tributaries in what is now modern-day Pakistan and northwest India. The era is the Bronze Age, somewhere between 2600 and 1900 BC, the flourishing period of one of the world's earliest and most extensive urban civilizations. The Indus Valley civilization, or the Harappan culture, as it's also known after Harappa, one of its major cities. This was a contemporary of ancient Egypt's Old and Middle Kingdoms and the great city-states of Mesopotamia. For centuries, it thrived a vast network of interconnected towns and sophisticated cities, and then for reasons still debated by scholars, it declined and eventually faded from historical memory, its existence largely unknown to the wider world, until its dramatic rediscovery by archaeologists in the 1920s. Imagine standing on the dusty plains, the air thick with the heat of the subcontinent. In the distance, rising from the earth, are the weathered, sun-baked brick ruins of a city like Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa. These were not haphazard collections of huts. They were meticulously planned urban centers. A mainstream historical fact is that the Indus Valley civilization was characterized by remarkable urban planning, with cities laid out on grid patterns, sophisticated water management systems including covered drains and private bathrooms, with bathing platforms in many houses, standardized weights and measures, and evidence of widespread trade networks stretching as far as Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf. These people were in many respects incredibly advanced for their time. As you wander in your mind's eye, of course, through the silent, remarkably straight streets of Mohenjo-Daro, between the high walls of multi-story brick houses, you might try to conjure the sounds and smells of its heyday. The rhythmic clang of coppersmiths at work, the gentle whir of potters' wheels, the chatter of merchants in a bustling marketplace, the distant calls of farmers bringing produce from the surrounding fertile lands, the laughter of children playing with tiny terracotta toys. The air might carry the scent of cooking fires, burning wood, or dried dung. The aroma of baking bread, perhaps the fragrance of incense from household shrines mingled with the earthy smell of the great river itself and the general inescapable hum of a densely populated city. You'd see granaries for storing communal wealth. Impressive public structures like the enigmatic Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, whose precise ritual function is still debated, and a distinct sense of order and civic organization. The Indus people left behind loads of these beautiful, intricate little soapstone seals, carved with images of animals, most famously a kind of majestic unicorn creature, and tantalizing lines of a pictographic script. Archaeologists have been diligently staring at these seals for the better part of a century, and we still basically know that the Indus people really liked unicorns or whatever that one-horned bovine was. They had a very impressive repertoire of other animal motifs, and they possessed a written language that currently makes about as much sense to us as a very complex, highly stylized doodle drawn by an exceptionally artistic squid. Their baby care manuals, if they ever committed such things to inscribed clay or perishable palm leaves, are probably titled something along the lines of Gurgle Grunt Squiggle Squigglefish, a Harappan Parent's Illustrated Guide to Surviving the First Year. It is into this sophisticated yet deeply mysterious urban world that a new life is born. In one of these well-constructed baked brick houses, perhaps in a quiet inner room, a Harappan woman has just endured the universal trial of childbirth. The arrival of a newborn, then as now, would have been an event of profound significance. In any society, the birth of children is essential for the continuation of families, for the strength of the community, for the very future of the culture. In a large, highly organized urban civilization like the IVC, the successful raising of healthy children to become productive members of society would have been of paramount importance. But how did these ancient people welcome their infants? What rituals did they perform to protect them, to name them, to integrate them into their families and their enigmatic belief system? This is where our journey becomes one of careful speculation, of piecing together tantalizing clues from the silent archaeological record. Because as we've noted, their script remains stubbornly undeciphered. We have no Harappan texts telling us directly, "On the 5th day after birth, thou shalt wave a sacred tamarisk branch over the infant, whilst chanting the 72 names of the great water buffalo spirit to ward off invisible river demons." We can only look at the material culture they left behind. Those thousands of terracotta figurines, many of them female forms, often interpreted as mother goddesses or fertility symbols. The intricate seals with their animal motifs and puzzling script. The layout of their homes, their burial customs. And try to infer something of their worldview and their rituals. The precise meaning and exact ritual function of the vast numbers of Indus seals, with their incredibly detailed and often highly stylized carvings of animals, like the famous unicorn, the zebu bull, the elephant, and the tiger, alongside those ever-present lines of undeciphered script, remain one of the most significant and tantalizing unsolved puzzles in South Asian archaeology. With scholarly theories ranging from their use in trade and economic administration as markers of ownership or origin, to religious or amuletic purposes, perhaps worn as protective charms, or used in specific rituals, with some of these functions potentially relating directly or indirectly to safeguarding families, ensuring prosperity, and by extension, protecting vulnerable newborns. The very title of our sleepy exploration tonight, Guarding New Life Strange Ancient Indus Rituals and Forbidden Things for Babies, acknowledges this inherent mystery. What seemed perfectly normal, logical, and ritually essential to an Indus Valley parent might appear utterly strange or peculiar to us. What things were considered forbidden for or around a newborn? Certain foods for the mother, certain actions by visitors, certain times or places deemed unlucky or dangerous for an infant, are largely lost to us, recoverable only through careful inference and comparison with later historically attested South Asian traditions, which may preserve some distant echoes of these Bronze Age practices, though such connections must always be made with extreme caution. These Indus folks were clearly master city planners, as evidenced by their grid-like streets, their advanced drainage systems, and their standardized brick sizes. Seriously impressive stuff for the Deep Bronze Age. You'd think a civilization that organized, said, and that keen on good plumbing might have also left behind a handy clay tablet or two, clearly stating Chapter 1, How to Successfully Stop Baby Og from Attempting to Teeth on Sacred Unfired Mud Bricks. Chapter 2, Acceptable Lullabies that do not accidentally summon minor river deities with poor temperaments. But no, the truly important intimate details of how they guarded their new lives remain for the most part tantalizingly out of our direct textual reach. So, as the first cry of a newborn Harappan baby echoes notionally through the imagined corridors of its baked brick home, you, Ageria, find yourself on the cusp of a deeply speculative yet utterly fascinating inquiry. We must become historical detectives, sifting through the silent evidence, trying to hear the whispered rituals and understand the unspoken fears and hopes that surrounded the arrival of new life in these magnificent, enigmatic cities by the great Indus River some 4,500 years ago. You are now standing, Ageria, at the very dawn of a new life within the well-ordered, baked brick confines of an ancient Indus Valley city. Perhaps Mohenjo-Daro with its great citadel mound, or Harappa with its vast granaries. The first cry of a newborn has echoed a tiny, universal sound, cutting across more than 4 millennia to reach our sleepy contemplation. We've acknowledged the profound mystery that shrouds so much of this remarkable Bronze Age civilization, particularly their beliefs and rituals due to their still undeciphered script. But the act of bearing life, the experience of pregnancy and childbirth, while culturally shaped, is also a fundamental human constant. So, let us now gently try to imagine what this momentous period might have been like for the Harappan mothers themselves, the women who ensured the continuity of this sophisticated urban culture by the great Indus River. Given the clear evidence of a highly organized society that valued order, cleanliness as seen in their remarkable sanitation systems, and presumably the well-being of its populace to ensure its own continuation, it's reasonable to assume that pregnancy and childbirth were viewed as significant and probably ritually important events. The sheer number of terracotta female figurines found at Indus Valley, Civilization IVC sites, many with exaggerated hips and breasts, elaborate headdresses, and sometimes depicted as pregnant or holding infants, is a mainstream historical fact that strongly suggests a cultural preoccupation with fertility motherhood, and perhaps the worship of mother goddesses or potent female deities. These weren't just idle artistic expressions. They likely held deep religious or symbolic meaning, possibly serving as votive offerings by expectant mothers seeking a safe delivery amulets for protection or representations of deities who governed these vital life processes. Archaeologists find all these rather expressive little terracotta ladies, some with impressively elaborate, almost fan-like headdresses, others with what appear to be strategically placed miniature bread rolls or panniers artfully arranged on their heads. Are they great mother goddesses overseeing the mysteries of life and death? Are they high-status fashion icons of the Bronze Age Indus elite proudly displaying the latest in ceremonial headgear? Or are they just really dedicated fans of advanced Bronze Age, artisanal baking, and elaborate hairstyles? The mystery, thanks to that stubbornly silent script, continues, making them absolutely perfect material for a gently speculative, sleepy history show. Imagine yourself a Jeria as a Harappan woman who realizes she is with child. In a society that clearly valued children, as evidenced by the presence of toys and the need to sustain large urban populations, your pregnant state would likely bring you a degree of respect and perhaps special care within your family and community. Your diet might be supplemented with specific nourishing foods, perhaps more dairy from their domesticated cattle and water buffalo protein-rich pulses, or certain fruits believed to promote a healthy pregnancy. The precise interpretation of the so-called mother goddess figurines from the Indus Valley civilization, whether they represent a single overarching great goddess, a pantheon of various local female deities associated with fertility and protection, revered ancestral figures, common household votive offerings made by expectant mothers or those seeking children, or even, as some more prosaic theories suggest, simply children's toys, remains a subject of vigorous and ongoing scholarly debate, complicated by the absence of accompanying textual explanations from the Indus people themselves. You might wear specific amulets or beads, perhaps made of carnelian faience or stetite, engraved with those enigmatic Indus symbols or animal motifs, all intended to protect you and your unborn child from ill luck disease or malevolent spiritual influences. You would undoubtedly participate in whatever household or communal rituals were deemed necessary to ensure a safe pregnancy and an easy delivery. Perhaps making offerings at a small shrine within your well-built brick home, or visiting a more public sacred area. Imagine the Harappan pregnancy cravings at Jeria. "My dearest husband," you might plaintively declare, "I find myself overcome with an irresistible, divinely inspired urge for some freshly roasted barley cakes, generously drizzled with wild Indus Delta honey, accompanied by a side of those tiny, slightly suspicious-looking, but apparently quite auspicious red river pebbles we saw the priestess collecting at the market yesterday." The baby, you understand, absolutely demands it for its proper spiritual development. Your poor, dutiful Harappan husband probably just nodded with profound understanding and immediately set off on a complex bartering expedition to fulfill these sacred, if somewhat peculiar, dietary requirements. When the time for birth arrives, you would almost certainly be attended by other women. This was, as we've noted for other ancient cultures, overwhelmingly women's business. Experienced midwives, if such a distinct profession existed, and it's highly probable it did, given the level of societal organization, along with your mother sisters, aunts, and other trusted female kin, would form your support network. The birthing space, likely a designated area within your multi-roomed house, perhaps a quiet inner courtyard or a specific chamber prepared for the occasion, would be made as comfortable and ritually clean as possible. Remember, these are the people who invented sophisticated urban drainage and had private bathing platforms in many homes. A concern for hygiene, at least as they understood it, seems to have been a hallmark of their culture. Your Harappan midwife arrives calm and experienced. Her toolkit. Probably not a modern obstetric bag, but certainly some soothing words of encouragement. A very clean one fervently hopes sharpened flint. Or if your family is more affluent, a bronze knife for cutting the umbilical cord, perhaps a selection of auspiciously shaped, smoothly worn river stones, or specially prepared mud bricks for you to squat or lean against during labor, and most importantly, the accumulated, orally transmitted wisdom of generations of Harappan women who had successfully navigated, "Yes, my dear, just try to breathe deeply through this rather intense cosmic realignment that is currently happening to your entire existence. It'll all be worth it in a moment." As for birthing positions, you would likely be encouraged to adopt active upright postures, squatting, kneeling, perhaps supported by your attendants, or leaning against a wall, allowing gravity to assist in the delivery. The image of women lying flat on their backs for childbirth is a relatively recent historical development and often not the most physiologically effective. Pain relief would have been limited to whatever herbal remedies were known, and the Indus people had a wide knowledge of local flora massage, rhythmic chanting or breathing techniques, and the crucial psychological support and encouragement of your female companions. A quirky or fringe tidbit for your consideration is the design of some of the more elaborate female terracotta figurines from IVC sites. Some feature those striking fan-shaped headdresses we mentioned, or very wide girdles or belts, sometimes with pannier-like attachments at the hips. While their exact meaning remains elusive, some scholars have speculated that these elaborate accoutrements might be symbolic of high-status particular ritual roles, or perhaps even represent specific attire or adornments associated with fertility, motherhood, or even the birthing process itself. Could some of these have been visual prayers for or representations of a safe and successful delivery? Once your Harappan baby has made its noisy, messy, but ultimately triumphant arrival into the world, your immediate focus and that of your attendants would be on ensuring both your well-being and that of the newborn. You would be exhausted, of course, but also likely filled with a profound sense of relief and joy. The immediate post-birth care would involve cleaning you and the baby, severing the umbilical cord, and perhaps a first gentle swaddling of the infant in soft Indus cotton or woolen cloth, a craft at which these people excelled. And then that first all-important offering of nourishment, your own milk, the vital colostrum that would provide your baby with its first taste of life and protection in this new bewildering world by the banks of the great river. The mother's trial for now is over. The guarding of new life has truly begun. The cries of your newborn Indus baby Egeria have now officially announced its arrival, a tiny, precious addition to your Harappan household. The immediate intense trial of childbirth is over for the mother, and a wave of profound relief mixed with exhaustion and burgeoning love likely washes over her. The attending women, her mother, sisters, aunts, perhaps a skilled local midwife, have done their work guiding this new life into the world with their accumulated wisdom and practical care. But as the initial flurry of activity subsides and the infant is gently cleaned, and perhaps offered its first nourishment, a new, more subtle kind of vigilance begins. For in the worldview of these ancient Indus people, as with so many early societies, a newborn was not yet considered fully of this world. It was a fragile being, its spirit still teetering on the threshold between the mysterious realm it had just departed and the solid, sun-baked brick reality of Mohenjo-Daro, or Harappa. This liminal state was perceived as one of immense vulnerability, not just to physical ailments, but to a host of unseen, often perilous spiritual dangers. A mainstream historical fact is that infant and child mortality rates were tragically almost unimaginably high in all ancient societies, including the sophisticated urban centers of the Indus Valley civilization. Disease infections for which there was no effective cure, complications from birth periods of malnutrition, if harvests failed or trade routes were disrupted, and simple accidents. All these pose constant threats to the survival of the very young. This stark reality of frequent early death would have profoundly shaped parental anxieties and almost certainly led to the development of numerous ritual practices and deeply ingrained beliefs aimed at protecting these fragile new beginnings from every conceivable harm both seen and unseen. When your baby sneezed in ancient Harappa, it wasn't just a case of, "Oh, bless you, did you catch a little draft?" It was more like, "Oh, by the great Zebu bull and the sacred fig tree, what unseen malevolence has just attempted to invade my precious child's tiny nostrils? Quick, someone fetch the apotropaic beads and the special anti-sneeze demon incense." Beyond the very real physical dangers, there was this pervasive belief in the spiritual vulnerability of the newborn. The infant having so recently crossed over from the otherworld or whatever the Indus people conceived, as the realm of spirits' ancestors or pre-existence was thought to retain a certain otherworldly scent or connection that could attract the attention of various non-human entities. The precise nature and extent of ancient Indus beliefs regarding the soul's journey before birth, the specific characteristics of their otherworld and its gradual anchoring into the physical world after birth are subjects of profound scholarly speculation and ongoing reconstruction, as our interpretations rely almost entirely on often ambiguous archaeological evidence such as burial practices and symbolic motifs on seals and pottery. Given the complete absence of deciphered contemporary textual sources that might explicitly outline their cosmology or eschatology, what kind of unseen perils might have worried a Harappan parent? While we don't know the specific names or natures of the spirits or deities they believe might trouble an infant, we can infer from common human anxieties and comparative folklore that they likely feared forces that could cause illness, bad luck, or even attempt to steal the child's spirit or swap it with something else. The concept of the evil eye, the belief that an envious or malevolent glance from another person could inflict harm, especially upon vulnerable children or prized livestock, is incredibly widespread across cultures and time, and it's highly plausible that the Indus people shared similar anxieties. This would lead to practices designed to deflect such negativity, perhaps by keeping the baby somewhat secluded in its early days or by using specific amulets or markings. The Indus Valley probably had its own unique, highly localized pantheon of things that go bump in the night and might have unhealthy designs on your baby's socks, or worse, its tiny soul. We don't know their specific names from the undeciphered script, but you can absolutely bet that Harappan parents had a specific ritual, a particular protective charm, or a specially designated offering for each one, probably involving a precisely measured quantity of blessed lentils and some very emphatic, if now silent to us, hand gestures. This perceived spiritual vulnerability would necessitate a whole suite of protective measures, many of which we will explore in more detail as our journey continues. Rituals of purification, the bestowal of a protective name, the use of amulets and charms, and the careful observance of certain forbidden things or taboos around the newborn. For instance, it might have been considered dangerous or forbidden to take a very young infant to certain places deemed spiritually potent or potentially unclean before it had undergone specific protective rites. Certain words might have been forbidden to be spoken in its presence. Strangers or even familiar people perceived to be in a state of ritual impurity or harboring ill will might be forbidden from approaching or handling the child. The nursing mother herself might have to observe specific dietary or behavioral taboos to ensure the purity and protective quality of her milk. These forbidden things weren't arbitrary rules. They were part of a logical system within their worldview designed to create a sacred, protected space around this new fragile life. Forget just worrying about your modern list of foods to avoid during pregnancy or baby-proofing the electrical sockets. Ancient Harappan parents probably had an extensive, mentally cataloged and communally reinforced checklist of spiritual safety measures. "Okay, my dearest spouse," one might say to the other, is the special anti-bad vibe amulet securely fastened to the cradle. Did anyone accidentally look at the baby with too much unconcealed, potentially envy-inducing admiration today, thereby inadvertently inviting the dreaded evil eye of unhappiness? And for goodness sake, please don't let your slightly eccentric great-uncle Nungle sing that incredibly depressing harvest lament anywhere near the child again. It's bound to attract gloomy agricultural spirits. Archaeological finds offer tantalizing, if often ambiguous, hints. The numerous terracotta female figurines, often called mother goddesses, might have been kept in households as powerful protectors of mothers and children, their presence invoked during childbirth and in the days that followed. The intricate animal motifs on Indus seals, the powerful bull, the enigmatic unicorn-like creature, the elephant, the tiger, could also have held apotropaic significance, their images perhaps used on amulets or placed strategically to ward off harm. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some of the very small, quite charming and intricately made terracotta toys found in IVC sites, things like miniature wheeled carts, little animals on strings, or tiny detailed pottery sets, might conceivably have been given to infants, not just for their later amusement, but also perhaps as a form of subtle spiritual distraction. Look here, mischievous spirit with nefarious intent. The presence of these tiny objects might silently communicate. Behold this wonderfully crafted, incredibly engaging miniature clay bullock. Go bother that for a while and leave the actual far more vulnerable human baby well alone. This is of course highly speculative, but it fits with the idea of using multiple layers of protection. The very structure of Harappan homes with their private courtyards and often windowless lower walls facing the street might also have contributed to a sense of seclusion and protection for the most vulnerable members of the household, including newborns. The famous Indus Valley concern for water and drainage, while clearly having practical hygienic benefits, could also have had a ritual dimension with clean flowing water seen as essential for maintaining purity and warding off the kind of spiritual stagnation that might attract negative influences. Ultimately, Ageria, as you gaze upon this imagined Harappan newborn, you understand that its fragile beginnings are a delicate dance between the seen and the unseen, the physical and the spiritual. Its parents and kin are not just battling against the tangible threats of a Bronze Age environment. They are also engaged in a constant, vigilant effort to guard its tender soul against a whole host of perceived, otherworldly perils, using every ritual tool and traditional belief at their disposal to ensure this new life takes firm root in the sunlit world of the living. Your tiny Harappan newborn Ageria has made its grand, if somewhat squawking entrance into the world, a fragile new soul teetering on that precarious threshold between the mysterious otherworld and the bustling, sun-baked brick reality of its Indus Valley city. You understand now, with a clarity born of ancient anxieties, that this infant is seen as profoundly vulnerable, not just to the everyday physical ailments that plagued Bronze Age life, but also to a whole host of unseen spiritual perils, malevolent influences, and perhaps the unwelcome attentions of capricious local spirits who might take an undue fancy to such a fresh, untainted being. This perceived vulnerability, this spiritual stickiness from its recent journey between realms, necessitates immediate and careful ritual action. And one of the most fundamental, most universal, and for the Indus people likely, most revered methods of cleansing and protection would undoubtedly have involved sacred water. A mainstream historical fact that simply cannot be overstated is the remarkable sophistication of water management and hydraulic engineering within the Indus Valley civilization. Their major cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa boasted incredibly advanced systems of wells reservoirs, private bathrooms with paved bathing platforms connected to elaborate covered street drains, and even large public bathing structures, the most famous being the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro. This clear societal emphasis on water, on its controlled use, and on the efficient removal of wastewater strongly suggests that water held not just practical hygienic importance, but also a profound ritual and symbolic significance for the Indus people. The Indus Valley folks, you see, were so astonishingly good at plumbing and waterworks, their bathrooms, even in ordinary dwellings, were probably nicer and more efficiently drained than some modern studio apartments you might have encountered in your travels. You can just imagine a Harappan baby's first ritual bath being a very sophisticated, remarkably well-drained, and spiritually top-notch affair. No leaky celestial taps or grumpy, stagnant water spirits causing trouble in this particular Bronze Age hydrotherapy spa treatment. So one of the very first ritual acts performed for your newborn Indus baby, Ageria, and indeed for you, the mother still considered to be in a state of ritual impurity and vulnerability after the ordeal of childbirth, would almost certainly have been a ceremonial lustration, a purification with water. For the infant, this first bath was far more than a simple wipe down to remove the physical residues of birth. It was a sacred cleansing intended to wash away any lingering taints or unwelcome attachments from the otherworld, to protect the child from negative spiritual influences, and perhaps even to consecrate it, to mark it as belonging to the human community under the benevolent gaze of whatever deities the Indus people revered. Imagine the scene within your Harappan home. The water for this special bath might have been drawn from a specific, perhaps particularly pure household well, Or it might have been ritually collected rainwater, or even water brought from the mighty Indus River itself, the lifeblood of their civilization, which was almost certainly considered sacred. This water might have been warmed gently over the hearth, and perhaps infused with specific herbs or crushed seeds known for their purifying or protective properties, though the exact nature of such Harappan herbalism remains largely unknown to us due to the undeciphered script. An elder woman of the household, your mother, your mother-in-law, or an experienced midwife, would likely perform this first ritual bathing with great care and solemnity. She would gently lave the baby's tiny body, perhaps murmuring ancient blessings, prayers, or protective incantations, words whose precise meaning is now lost to us, but whose intent was undoubtedly to cleanse, to bless, and to shield this new life. After the messy, somewhat chaotic business of actually being born, that first significant ritual bath was probably like hitting the spiritual reset button for the Harappan baby. Okay. Its tiny, freshly cleansed soul might think, all residual otherworldly cooties and interdimensional travel, grime officially rinsed off. I am now accepting applications for benevolent household deities, particularly potent good luck charms, and perhaps a lifetime supply of easily digestible milk. Please form an orderly, ritually pure queue by my freshly purified and auspiciously positioned cradle. You, the mother, would also undergo a similar, though perhaps more extensive, ritual purification with water. Childbirth, with its attendant blood and bodily fluids, was seen in many ancient cultures as rendering the mother temporarily ritually unclean or set apart. This wasn't necessarily a negative judgment on her, but rather an acknowledgement of her passage through a powerful, mysterious, and spiritually charged life-giving process. Her own ceremonial bathing would mark the end of this liminal period, cleansing her, restoring her to a state of ritual purity, and allowing her to fully rejoin the normal social and religious life of her household and community. The famous Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, that large, beautifully constructed sunken pool made of meticulously fitted baked bricks and sealed with bitumen, is a monumental testament to the importance of ritual bathing in Indus society. The precise purpose and symbolic meaning of the Great Bath, whether it was used for general public ablutions, for specific priestly purification rites, for particular festivals, or perhaps even as part of a royal or elite ritual complex, remain subjects of ongoing archaeological interpretation and scholarly debate, especially given the absence of any decipherable texts to explain its function. However, its very existence, its careful construction, and its prominent position within the city's citadel mound strongly indicate that large-scale communal ritual bathing played a significant role in the religious and civic life of the Indus people. While your newborn baby Egeria certainly wouldn't be tossed into this rather grand public structure for its first scrub down the societal value placed on such ritual purification with water, would undoubtedly have permeated down to the household level, informing the private domestic rituals surrounding childbirth. Was it a sacred temple pool for high priests to get spiffy before important ceremonies? Was it a fancy, exclusive public swimming bath for the Harappan elite to cool off during the scorching Indus summers? Or was it simply the world's oldest, biggest, and most impressively over-engineered municipal bird bath? Whatever its exact function, it clearly demonstrates that these people were very, very serious about their H2O and its potential for more than just quenching thirst. A quirky or fringe tidbit that further suggests the sacred importance of water in their belief system comes from some of the enigmatic Indus seals. A few of these tiny, intricately carved soapstone objects depict scenes that appear to involve figures in ritual bathing postures, or processions near water sources, or even figures that might be interpreted as water deities, perhaps horned figures associated with rivers or sacred pools. The meticulous way their urban drainage systems were constructed, designed to carry wastewater efficiently away from dwellings and public streets, also implies a sophisticated understanding of hygiene and a cultural concern with removing pollution, both physical and by extension perhaps spiritual. The sacred waters of the Indus, then. Egeria would flow through these first crucial rituals, washing, cleansing, purifying, and protecting, helping to gently but firmly detach your newborn from the lingering grasp of the otherworld, and consecrate it for its new life within the orderly brick-built embrace of its Harappan family and city. It was a baptism into this world Indus Valley style. Your tiny Harappan newborn Egeria has now been ritually cleansed with the sacred life-giving waters that were so central to Indus Valley existence. This purification was a vital first step in washing away the perceived vulnerabilities of birth and anchoring the infant more firmly to this earthly realm. But the task of guarding new life, Ka, as our sleepy exploration is titled, is far from over. The ancient world was perceived as being alive with unseen forces, and the Indus people, for all their sophisticated urban planning and advanced material culture, would undoubtedly have shared this near-universal human concern for protecting their most fragile members from spiritual harm. And one of the most widespread methods for achieving this protection across countless cultures and millennia has been through the use of amulets, charms, and sacred objects, tangible items believed to be imbued with protective power. Tonight, we delve into the mysterious terracotta figurines and enigmatic seals of the Indus Valley civilization, considering their potential role as tiny silent guardians for the smallest inhabitants of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. A mainstream historical fact is that excavations at Indus Valley civilization sites have yielded a truly astonishing number of small, portable artifacts. Most famously, the distinctive square steatite seals intricately carved with animal motifs and lines of that still undeciphered script, but also a vast array of terracotta baked clay figurines. These figurines depict both human forms, predominantly female, and a wide variety of animals. Many scholars believe that a significant portion of these objects, particularly the female figurines often dubbed mother goddesses, and many of the seals likely had ritualistic, religious, or amuletic functions, possibly including important protective uses within the domestic sphere, such as safeguarding households, ensuring fertility, and very relevant to our interest, protecting vulnerable infants and children. Let's first consider those ubiquitous terracotta female figurines. You've already imagined them, Egeria perhaps in the context of prayers for fertility, or as representations of powerful mother goddesses overseeing childbirth. Many of these figurines are quite striking, often with elaborate fan-shaped headdresses, multiple strands of necklaces, and wide girdles. Some are depicted holding infants or with clear signs of pregnancy. It's highly plausible that small, perhaps specially consecrated versions of these figurines, or even just the idea they embodied, served as powerful protective guardians for newborns. Imagine a Harappan mother carefully placing such a terracotta image near her baby's cradle, or in a small household shrine, a silent plea to the divine feminine to watch over her child, to nurture its growth, and to ward off any sickness or malevolent influence. So, your Harappan baby's nursery isn't just simply decorated with, say, a nice woven wall hanging depicting a particularly cheerful zebu bowl. It's a veritable miniature fortress spiritually fortified by an army of tiny, slightly fierce-looking terracotta mother goddesses and stern-faced clay animal guardians. Their message to any lurking evil spirits or bad luck sprites is clear. Don't even think about bothering this precious baby. We have a legion of miniature ceramic bodyguards on duty. They're surprisingly well fired, and they most definitely mean business. Animal figurines, also common finds, could have played a similar protective role. The powerful bull, the zebu, with its distinctive hump, is a frequent motif in IVC art, likely symbolizing strength, virility, and perhaps protective power. Terracotta rams, birds, monkeys, and even more enigmatic or mythical-seeming creatures have been found. Could these have been placed near an infant as symbolic guardians, each animal embodying certain protective qualities or warding off specific types of harm? Perhaps the image of a strong bull was meant to imbue the child with strength, or a bird figurine to protect its spirit. The precise interpretation of the so-called mother goddess figurines from the Indus Valley civilization, whether they truly represent a single universally worshipped great goddess, a diverse pantheon of various local female deities and spirits associated with fertility, childbirth, and household protection. Revered ancestral figures, common household votive offerings made by expectant mothers, or those seeking healthy children, or even, as some more prosaic but less widely accepted theories occasionally suggest, simply children's toys or mundane decorative items, remains one of the most vigorous areas of scholarly debate in Indus archaeology, perpetually complicated by the undeciphered script and the frustrating lack of accompanying textual explanations from the Indus people themselves. The line between a sacred ritual object and a child's cherished plaything can also be quite blurry in ancient contexts. A toy given with a blessing could easily become a protective charm. Then there are those enigmatic Indus seals, usually small squares of carved steatite, featuring incredibly detailed engravings of animals. That famous unicorn, likely a stylized bull, seen in profile-humped zebu bulls, elephants, tigers, rhinoceroses, water buffalo, and more, often accompanied by a short inscription in the undeciphered Indus script. While a primary function of these seals was almost certainly economic and administrative, perhaps used to stamp clay sealings on goods marking ownership origin or contents. The fact that many are pierced as if to be worn on a string strongly suggests they also served as personal amulets or badges of identity. Could specific seals bearing particular animal motifs or combinations of script signs have been chosen for their perceived protective qualities, and worn by pregnant women nursing mothers, or even tied to an infant's cradle or clothing? The unicorn figure, so prevalent and majestic, is often thought to represent a powerful, perhaps mythical or totemic being. Wearing its image or placing it near a baby might have been seen as invoking its potent protective energies. Those famous Indus unicorn seals, you ponder. Maybe their primary function wasn't just for stamping important trade documents regulating the flow of carnelian beads and lapis lazuli. Perhaps a particularly fine, well-carved miniature one was lovingly hung over the baby's cradle as the ultimate Bronze Age mythical security guard. Its silent one-horned gaze a clear warning protected by Unicorn Industries Inc., ensuring sweet dreams and no unsolicited otherworldly visitations since approximately 2500 BC. The undeciphered script itself, those beautifully precise little pictograms and symbols, might also have been considered to hold inherent magical power. In many cultures, writing itself, especially when its meaning is esoteric or known only to a select few, can be seen as a potent, magical tool. Perhaps certain combinations of signs were believed to form a protective spell or a sacred formula, their very presence on an amulet near the child enough to deter harm. Other materials commonly found in IVC sites could also have served as components of these protective guardian assemblages for infants. Beads made of semi-precious stones like carnelian, often reddish, a color associated with life and protection. Lapis lazuli, though more often for elite adults, steatite or faience, a glazed ceramic, are abundant. Strings of these beads might have adorned a child or its cradle. Shells, particularly certain types of seashells, often carried associations with the life-giving ocean fertility and protection in many ancient cultures, and these too are found at Indus sites. A quirky or fringe tidbit for you, Egeria, is the discovery of tiny hollow terracotta rattles in IVC excavations. These often contain small clay pellets that make a sound when shaken. While undoubtedly serving as a simple toy to amuse an infant, it's also quite plausible that, like rattles in many other traditional cultures, they served a dual purpose. Their sound might have been believed to actively scare away unseen evil spirits, or to soothe a fretful child believed to be troubled by such influences. It's like an ancient Harappan baby rattle with a built-in spiritual security system and early childhood entertainment, features all rolled into one. Multi-purpose Bronze Age parenting tools at their finest. These terracotta guardians, these enigmatic seals, these colorful beads and resonant rattles, they offer us fleeting silent glimpses into the profound anxieties and tender hopes of Harappan parents. Lacking their words, we can only imagine the specific prayers whispered over these objects, the precise fears they were meant to allay, the exact blessings they were intended to invoke. But their very presence in such abundance speaks volumes about the enduring human need to surround new life with every conceivable form of protection, both tangible and magical, in that long-ago world by the Indus. Your tiny Harappan newborn. Egeria is now ritually cleansed by the sacred waters of the Indus region, and hopefully well protected by an array of carefully chosen terracotta guardians. Enigmatic seals, and perhaps a few well-placed amulets, whose precise meanings are now lost to the mists of time. The immediate spiritual dangers of that liminal threshold between worlds have been addressed with all the ritual care your Bronze Age community could muster. Now attention turns to another equally vital aspect of guarding this new life, its first sustenance. For the ancient Indus people, like all societies, the act of feeding their infants would have been far more than just a biological necessity. It would almost certainly have been imbued with its own layers of ritual significance, traditional wisdom, and perhaps even a few peculiar beliefs or forbidden practices. The absolute, undisputed primary food source for any Harappan infant in its earliest days and months would of course have been its mother's milk. Breastfeeding was the universal norm across the ancient world, a biological imperative for infant survival. That first milk, the colostrum so rich in antibodies and nutrients, while your Indus ancestors wouldn't have understood the precise immunological science, they would have undoubtedly recognized its life-giving protective power through generations of observation. This first milk might have been seen as spiritually potent, a direct transfer of the mother's life force, her vitality, and perhaps even ancestral blessings or protective qualities to her child. The moment of the first latching, the first successful suckling would have been one of profound relief and quiet joy, a confirmation of this fundamental bond. It's plausible that small, private rituals or whispered prayers accompanied this intimate act offered by you, the mother, or by the experienced female kin, assisting you asking for the milk to flow abundantly and for the child to thrive and grow strong. As the infant grows, the time for introducing foods beyond mother's milk would arrive. The exact age and specific methods of weaning Indus infants and the precise nature of the transitional foods introduced to their diet remain largely unknown, due to the complete lack of deciphered textual records from the period, compelling researchers and archaeologists to draw very cautious analogies from traditional South Asian dietary practices that may have ancient roots from ethnographic studies of early agricultural societies elsewhere, and sometimes from isotopic analysis of skeletal remains, where available and well-preserved, which can offer clues about dietary shifts. However, based on what we know of Indus agriculture, we can make some educated guesses about what these first semi-solid foods might have been. Baby's first official solid food experience in ancient Harappa. Are you imagining a tiny, perfectly formed, unicorn-shaped biscuit, perhaps delicately sweetened with wild honey? Well, probably not quite that Instagrammable. More likely it was a very bland, very mushy, but hopefully quite nutritious barley or wheat porridge. Eat up, little one. You might lovingly coax. It's absolutely packed with Bronze Age goodness, and only slightly tastes like, well, mostly like slightly warm, wet clay, but it's good for you, I promise. Good. The Indus Valley civilization cultivated a variety of grains. A mainstream historical fact is that their diet, as reconstructed from extensive archaeological evidence, including charred botanical remains and impressions in pottery, included wheat. Several varieties, barley, millet, and even rice in some regions, along with a range of pulses like lentils, chickpeas, and peas. These would have formed the basis of the adult diet and suitably prepared. Ground fine-cooked, soft into porridges or gruels, they would have been ideal first foods for infants once they were ready for something more substantial than milk. Dairy products beyond mother's milk were also likely available. The Indus people had domesticated zebu cattle, water buffalo, sheep, and goats, all of which could provide milk. Whether they processed this into forms like yogurt or ghee clarified butter, which are staples in later South Asian cuisine, is plausible. And these would also be suitable energy-rich foods for growing children. Mashed local fruits such as dates, which were cultivated melons or berries, could also have provided sweetness and nutrients. Honey, if available from wild bees or early beekeeping, would have been a precious sweetener and perhaps seen as possessing special life-enhancing properties. Now, the actual introduction of these first real foods might well have been a ritual occasion in itself. Many cultures throughout history have had and still have specific ceremonies marking a child's first taste of solid food, like the Hindu Annaprasana ceremony, for example. Did the Indus people have a similar rite of passage? We don't know for sure, but it's a strong possibility. This first bite ritual could have involved offering a tiny symbolic portion of a specially prepared food, perhaps a particularly fine grain porridge or a morsel sweetened with honey, to the infant. Before the baby gets its first proper taste of that delicious, if somewhat unexciting, lentil mush, a minuscule portion might have been reverently offered to those terracotta household god figurines we talked about, or perhaps to the ancestral spirits. Here you go, O great divine protector of our humble hearth and home. The offering might silently convey, please accept this microscopic appetizer of slightly overcooked barley. We humbly request that you bless this child's digestion, ensure its continued growth, and perhaps don't smite us all with a terrible plague if the porridge turns out to be a bit lumpy this morning. The water an infant drank would also have been of critical concern. The advanced wells and sophisticated water systems of the IVC cities suggest a societal understanding of the importance of relatively clean water. Was the baby's first ritually offered drink of water beyond milk also given with special blessings, or from a particular sacred vessel? Again, we can only speculate, but given the likely ritual significance of water in their purification rites, it's a distinct possibility. And what about forbidden things for Indus babies or their nursing mothers? Here we enter even more speculative territory. But we can make some cautious inferences based on common ancient world beliefs and later regional traditions. A nursing mother might have been advised by elder women to avoid certain foods believed to be too heating or cooling for her milk, or foods thought to cause colic or other distress in the infant. The baby itself would obviously be forbidden from consuming anything indigestible or dangerous, but there might also have been specific ingredients or preparations deemed spiritually inauspicious or magically harmful for such a vulnerable young being. Perhaps certain types of fish from the Indus River or game animals associated with particular spirits were taboo. Or maybe it was forbidden to feed a child food prepared by someone considered ritually impure or unlucky. Without their texts, these specific forbidden things remain tantalizingly just beyond our grasp, part of the silent, everyday wisdom of Harappan mothers. Forbidden things for Harappan babies, if we were to guess, with a touch of sleepy humor probably included. 1. Enthusiastically chewing on those priceless, undeciphered Indus unicorn seals, serious choking hazard. And potential irretrievable loss of vital international shipping information. 2. Attempting to use the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro as a personal splash pool during important civic purification ceremonies. 3. And, of course, loudly demanding that their daily barley porridge be served in a solid gold goblet encrusted with lapis lazuli. Some luxuries, little one, were just for the grown-up Harappan elites, or possibly the gods themselves. A quirky or fringe tidbit that comes from the archaeological record is the discovery of some very small, often rather elegantly made spouted pottery vessels at various IVC sites. While their exact use is like so much else debated by scholars, they could have been used as lamps for oil for ritual libations or for dispensing other precious liquids. Some archaeologists have plausibly suggested that these tiny beak-like spouts would have made them perfectly suited for feeding liquids such as animal milk, thin gruel, or perhaps even herbal medicines to infants, or to individuals who were sick and unable to drink from a normal cup. An ancient Harappan sippy cup, if you will, a testament to their practical ingenuity in caring for their youngest and most vulnerable. The first sustenance offered to your Harappan newborn Egeria was thus a carefully considered blend of biological necessity, traditional wisdom, and almost certainly a deep layer of ritual and symbolic meaning, all designed to nourish not just the body, but also the spirit of this precious new life by the Indus. Your Harappan newborn Egeria is now fed, ritually cleansed, with the sacred waters of the Indus region, and surrounded by a phalanx of tiny terracotta guardians, and perhaps a few enigmatic symbol-laden seals, all part of that ancient earnest effort to guard this fragile new life. The infant lies in its cradle, perhaps a simple woven basket lined with soft Indus cotton or animal furs, or a more sturdy wooden construction. A tiny, vulnerable being at the heart of a bustling Bronze Age household. But beyond the tangible charms and the physical acts of care, what of the more intangible atmosphere that surrounds it? What were the sounds, the words, the silent symbols that might have soothed, protected, or shaped the earliest experiences of an Indus child? Here we enter a realm of profound mystery, dominated by the beautiful yet stubbornly silent Indus script. A mainstream historical fact and one of the great enduring enigmas of archaeology is that the Indus script found on thousands of short inscriptions on those distinctive steatite seals as well as on pottery copper tablets and other small objects remains entirely undeciphered, despite over a century of intensive scholarly effort. We can see its elegance, its intricate signs, often depicting animals, human-like figures, and abstract geometric patterns, but we cannot with any certainty read its meaning. This profound silence of the script means that the specific prayers, the lullabies, the protective incantations, the names of deities invoked for a child's well-being, if they were ever written down in this form, are lost to us. The Indus script is like the universe's most tantalizing, most frustratingly beautiful, and currently completely uncrackable crossword puzzle. There are thousands of exquisitely carved clues, an array of fascinating symbols that look like tiny fish complex grids, and what might be a person doing some very enthusiastic Bronze Age yoga, but absolutely no answer key has yet been found. The Harappan equivalent of baby's first words. A parent's guide to deciphering adorable gurgles. If it ever existed in written form, is probably hidden in those elegant squiggles somewhere, looking for all the world like a tiny picture of a zebu bowl standing next to a jar and a very perplexed-looking stick figure. The ongoing debate over whether the Indus script represents a full logosyllabic linguistic system, capable of recording complex narratives, poetry, and prayers, much like Mesopotamian cuneiform or Egyptian hieroglyphs, or if it was primarily a more limited system used mainly for administrative, economic, or ritualistic identification. Purposes such as recording names, titles, ownership, or perhaps short dedications to deities continues to be a central focus of Indus Valley scholarship. And this directly impacts our ability to reconstruct their intangible cultural heritage, such as specific spoken charms, lullabies, or detailed religious beliefs beyond what can be inferred from material culture. Despite this textual silence, we can be virtually certain that the world of an Indus infant was filled with sound, and that much of this sound would have been imbued with meaning and intention. Lullabies are a universal human practice, ancient rhythms and melodies used to soothe fretful babies and lull them to sleep. What might a Harappan lullaby have sounded like in Egeria? We can only imagine. Perhaps gentle repetitive melodies sung in the soft cadences of their lost language, echoing the rhythm of the mother's heartbeat or the gentle sway of the cradle. The lyrics, if we could understand them, might have spoken of the great, life-giving Indus River, of benevolent animal spirits, of protective household deities, or perhaps simply of warmth, safety, and a mother's boundless love. Imagine a Harappan lullaby hummed softly in the dim, firelit interior of a brick house in Mohenjo-daro. "Sleep now, my precious little pearl of the Indus," a mother might croon by the river so wide and deep. "May the great zebu bowl stand guard by your sleep. May the granaries be full and the monsoon winds blow kind, and no naughty water sprites ever trouble your mind. Don't you worry about that undeciphered script, my sweet. No one will fully read it for 1,000 more years, or maybe even 3,000 or 4,000. It's quite a tricky treat. Okay, perhaps they weren't quite that meta about their own linguistic legacy, but the sentiment of loving protection would surely have been there. Spoken charms and incantations, too, were likely a significant part of the auditory landscape surrounding an Indus cradle. In a world where unseen forces were believed to be ever present, the power of specific words uttered with the correct intention, and perhaps at an auspicious time, would have been a vital tool for protection. The midwife, the mother, or an elder woman of the household might have recited traditional protective verses while anointing the baby with oil while swaddling it, or when placing amulets around its neck or cradle. These words, whose exact forms are now lost, would have been another layer in the complex system of guarding new life. And what of music beyond lullabies? Archaeological finds from IVC sites include depictions of stringed instruments like arched harps or lyres on some seals, various types of drums and whistles or flutes, made of terracotta or bone. While these might have been used in larger communal ceremonies or for adult entertainment, it's also plausible that simpler musical sounds, the gentle shaking of a terracotta rattle, those delightful, quirky little objects we discussed earlier, possibly serving as both toy and spiritual noisemaker, the soft plucking of a single string or the rhythmic tapping of a small drum, could have been used to soothe an infant or to create a harmonious protective atmosphere within the household. The cradle itself, that small, contained world of the newborn, held its own secrets. Beyond the tangible amulets and comfortable wrappings, what else was there? We know the Indus people were skilled artisans producing beautiful painted pottery, intricate beadwork, and fine textiles. Perhaps the cradle was adorned with specific patterns or symbols woven into its fabric lining or painted onto its wooden frame, each carrying a protective meaning now lost to us. Your Harappan nursery, Egeria, is likely beautifully, if enigmatically, decorated with all these cool, distinctive Indus symbols. A little stylized unicorn motif painted on a pottery shard here, a charmingly abstract fish design woven into a hanging there. They certainly look very aesthetically pleasing. But do they mean, "Sweet dreams, little one, may your naps be long, and your burps be mighty"? Or do they perhaps translate more along the lines of, "Warning, contents within this cradle are extremely prone to spitting up partially digested barley porridge without prior notice"? If only those silent symbols could whisper their secrets to us. It certainly adds a rather delicious frisson of profound mystery to your imagined Harappan nap time. Even without understanding their written language, the sheer care evident in the material culture associated with daily life in the Indus Valley civilization. The well-planned cities, the emphasis on cleanliness, the sophisticated craftsmanship, the presence of what appear to be children's toys, strongly suggests a society that valued its children and invested considerable effort in their well-being, and by extension, their protection. The sounds of the household, the mother's voice, the rhythmic thump of grain being ground, the distant calls from the street, the chirping of unseen insects. All these would have formed the first complex auditory tapestry for an Indus infant, a world of sound that, while its specific linguistic meanings are lost, would have conveyed comfort, familiarity, and the reassuring presence of human life. The silent symbols on seals and pottery remain a tantalizing puzzle, but the lost lullabies, the whispered blessings, the protective chants, these formed an invisible yet undoubtedly powerful shield around the cradle's secrets. The air in your Harappan home Egeria, though carrying the faint, ever-present scent of wood smoke, and perhaps the distant aroma of baking barley bread, is also filled with the silent hum of unspoken prayers. The lingering power of purification rites and the almost tangible presence of those enigmatic symbols and terracotta guardians you've placed around your newborn's cradle. The sounds that soothe your infant, the lost lullabies, the gentle rhythms of household life, are as mysterious to us now as the undeciphered script on those ubiquitous Indus seals. But beyond these intangible spiritual and auditory comforts, there is a very real, very physical form of embrace that would have been crucial to your baby's well-being: the soft protective haven of woven textiles. In a civilization as advanced in its material culture as the Indus Valley, the way an infant was clothed, swaddled and bedded, would have been a matter of both practical care and quite possibly further ritual significance. A mainstream historical fact, and one that speaks volumes about the sophistication of this Bronze Age culture, is that the Indus Valley civilization was one of the world's earliest centers for the cultivation of cotton and the production of cotton textiles. Archaeological evidence, though, direct fabric survivals are incredibly rare due to the climate abounds in the form of countless terracotta spindle whorls used for spinning thread loom weights, suggesting the use of upright looms, impressions of woven cloth left on pottery or clay ceilings. And in a few exceptionally fortunate instances, tiny actual fragments of mineralized cotton or bast fibers. The Indus people were in essence Bronze Age trendsetters when it came to cotton fashion, and probably linen too. While many of their contemporaries in other parts of the world were still primarily relying on somewhat itchy wool or stiff animal hides, the Harappans were likely enjoying the comfort and breathability of cool cotton garments, perfectly suited to the often scorching climate of the Indus Plains. Their babies, one can reasonably assume, were probably among the best dressed, least sweaty, and most comfortably clad infants on the entire Bronze Age block. The most immediate and intimate use of these textiles for your newborn Egeria would have been in the practice of swaddling. As we've touched upon in other ancient contexts, tightly wrapping an infant in bands of cloth was a near universal custom, and it's almost inconceivable that the Harappans with their advanced textile industry wouldn't have practiced it. Imagine your tiny Indus baby, after its purifying first bath, being carefully and lovingly wrapped in strips of soft, perhaps freshly woven cotton or fine wool. These swaddling cloths would provide warmth, especially during cooler nights or in draftier parts of their well-engineered brick houses. They would offer a comforting sense of security, mimicking the snug embrace of the womb, which could help to soothe a restless infant and promote sleep. And as many ancient peoples believed, the firm binding was thought to help the baby's delicate limbs grow straight and strong, protecting it from accidental injury as it thrashed about with those charmingly uncoordinated newborn movements. Harappan swaddling, you can imagine, wasn't just a haphazard affair of randomly wrapping the baby up like a leftover piece of flatbread. It was likely an art form in itself, passed down from mother to daughter, involving specific techniques of folding and binding. Does this rather intricate seven-fold natural cotton wrap truly bring out the auspicious curve of his tiny chin? Or should we perhaps try the diagonal light wool binding? Which I hear is all the rage in the northern Harappan suburbs this season, and is said to be particularly effective at ensuring a calm and non-colicky disposition. These things matter, you know. The specific weaving techniques and the full range of patterns and colors achieved by the Indus people in their textiles are areas of ongoing research, and due to the scarcity of directly preserved fabrics, often rely on careful analysis of textile impressions on clay, the study of tools like spindle whorls and loom weights, and interpretations of clothing depicted on human figurines and seals, making the precise nature of the swaddling cloths, whether plain or patterned, dyed or natural, largely speculative, though their softness and cleanliness would have been paramount. Could these swaddling bands themselves have been woven with specific patterns or colors deemed protective or auspicious for an infant? Given the Harappans' love for intricate designs on their pottery and seals, it's certainly a tantalizing possibility. Perhaps certain symbols like those enigmatic script signs or stylized animal motifs were subtly incorporated into the baby's first wrappings, a silent woven layer of magical defense. As your Indus infant grows, moving beyond the tightly swaddled stage, it would require simple garments. These too would likely be fashioned from breathable cotton or soft wool. Think of tiny tunics, simple loincloths, or small skirts easy to put on and take off, and suitable for the warm climate. While direct evidence for elaborate baby clothes is scarce, some of the terracotta human figurines, both male and female, are depicted wearing patterned or draped garments, suggesting that the Indus people had a sophisticated sense of clothing design and adornment. It's not too much of a stretch to imagine that a cherished child in a prosperous Harappan family might have worn clothing that was not only practical, but also pleasing to the eye, perhaps dyed with natural pigments from local plants or minerals, or even featuring simple embroidered or applied decorations. The cradle or sleeping place of your Harappan baby would also be made comfortable and secure with textiles. A woven wicker basket or a simple wooden cot might be lined with soft animal furs. Perhaps sheepskin layers of woolen cloth or woven mats made from reeds or grasses, creating a snug and protective nest. The quality and fineness of these textiles, from the swaddling bands to the cradle linings, would undoubtedly reflect the family's social standing and the immense care lavished upon this new precious life. A quirky or fringe tidbit that underscores the ubiquity and importance of textiles in the Indus Valley civilization is that impressions of woven fabric have sometimes been found on the inside of pottery vessels. This suggests that cloth was not only used for clothing and domestic purposes, but was also employed in other craft processes, perhaps to help shape the clay to prevent it from sticking to molds, or even for decorative texturing before firing. It's a subtle but fascinating reminder of how deeply interwoven textiles were into the fabric of their daily existence, extending even into other areas of their sophisticated material culture. Archaeologists get incredibly excited when they find even a tiny mineralized 4,000-year-old scrap of actual Indus cotton clinging to a piece of pottery. It's like finding a single perfectly preserved sequin from a mythical unicorn's long-lost disco outfit. It doesn't tell you the whole story by any means, but it hints at a truly fabulous and largely vanished textile party that must have been going on for centuries. And what of forbidden things in the realm of Indus textiles for babies? Here we are firmly in the land of informed conjecture, Egeria. Were certain materials considered unlucky or ritually impure to use for an infant's clothing or bedding? Perhaps recycled cloth from garments worn by someone who had died, or certain animal skins associated with inauspicious creatures might have been avoided. Were there specific colors or patterns deemed unsuitable or dangerous for a newborn? Perhaps colors associated with mourning or with malevolent deities or spirits? It's possible. In a world where symbolism was so potent, the very threads that touched a baby's skin would have been chosen with care, not just for comfort and practicality, but also with an eye towards their spiritual and protective qualities, ensuring that these woven comforts also served as a subtle, silent shield. The advanced textile skills of the Indus people provided not just physical warmth, but a culturally rich and symbolically charged embrace for their newest generation. Your Harappan newborn Egeria is now a cherished, if still incredibly tiny member of its Bronze Age household, nestled amidst the soft comfort of Indus cotton or wool, soothed by the imagined cadences of lost lullabies, and surrounded by a silent phalanx of terracotta figurines and enigmatic amuletic seals. You've seen how the very practical acts of feeding and clothing were likely interwoven with subtle rituals and protective beliefs. But the task of guarding new life in this ancient Indus world extended beyond just tangible comforts and charms. It would have also involved navigating a complex, if now largely invisible to us, landscape of purity and pollution of things deemed auspicious and things considered forbidden, especially around such a spiritually sensitive being as a newborn infant. A mainstream historical fact is that concepts of ritual purity and pollution and the associated taboos and cleansing rites designed to maintain or restore a state of purity were deeply significant features in many ancient societies, particularly in the Near East and South Asia. While the undeciphered Indus script prevents us from knowing their specific terminology or the exact philosophical underpinnings of their beliefs, their remarkable emphasis on water bathing facilities and sophisticated drainage systems strongly suggest that notions of cleanliness, both physical and ritual, were highly valued in their culture. It is therefore highly probable that these concepts would have played a crucial role in dictating what was considered appropriate, safe, or conversely forbidden in the delicate period surrounding childbirth and early infancy. The Harappan home with a brand new baby, Egeria, was probably cleaner than a modern-day surgeon's operating theater, at least in a profoundly ritual and symbolic sense, if not necessarily in terms of microscopic germ theory. Did you remember a concerned Harappan grandmother might ask to properly purify the threshold with sacred water after great-uncle Zarg accidentally brought in that suspiciously unblessed and possibly slightly cursed turnip from his outlying fields? We simply cannot have impure root vegetables compromising the baby's delicate spiritual aura. Now, can we? Consider the state of the mother and child immediately after birth. In countless cultures, the process of childbirth itself, with its attendant blood and bodily fluids, was seen as rendering both the mother and the newborn ritually impure, or perhaps more accurately, placing them in a sacred, set-apart, and highly sensitive liminal state. This wasn't necessarily a negative moral judgment, but an acknowledgement of their recent profound contact with the immense power and mystery of life creation, a brush with the boundary between worlds. During this period, which might last for a specific number of days, perhaps 7 or 40 common numbers in many traditions for postpartum seclusion, certain restrictions or forbidden things would almost certainly apply. For instance, it's highly likely that you, the new Harappan mother, would be confined to a specific part of the house, perhaps the birthing room or a designated quiet area for a set period. It might be forbidden for you to engage in your normal household duties, to prepare food for other family members, or to enter sacred spaces like the household shrine or public ritual areas until you had undergone further, more comprehensive purification rites. Certain people might also be forbidden from approaching you or your newborn during this vulnerable time. This could include individuals who had recently been in contact with death, which was seen as the ultimate source of ritual pollution, those suffering from certain illnesses, or perhaps even individuals perceived as being unlucky, harboring envy, the evil eye we discussed, or possessing some kind of negative spiritual energy. If you wanted to pop round and visit the new Harappan baby down the meticulously planned street Egeria, you probably wouldn't just casually drop in unannounced with a bunch of grapes. First, you'd likely need to fill out a rather detailed ritual purity pre-screening questionnaire. Ensure you hadn't inadvertently stepped on any particularly ill-omened beetles on the way over, and possibly consent to a light precautionary ceremonial smudging with some very serious-smelling, locally sourced, spiritually potent herbs. No casual, unvetted drop-ins allowed when delicate spiritual cooties and otherworldly contaminants are a primary concern. The food you consumed as a nursing mother Egeria might also be subject to certain prohibitions or recommendations based on beliefs about how your diet could affect the purity and quality of your milk, and thus the health and spiritual well-being of your infant. Certain heating or cooling foods categories, common in later South Asian traditional medicine, which might have distant Harappan roots, or foods associated with particular animals or plants deemed inauspicious, could have been temporarily forbidden to you. The extent to which the Indus Valley civilization possessed a fully codified and articulated system of ritual purity and pollution, comparable in its complexity to, say, the later Vedic or classical Hindu traditions of South Asia, and precisely how such concepts specifically govern their everyday practices around childbirth, infancy, and domestic life, is a highly speculative but fascinating area of ongoing research, with archaeologists and Indologists cautiously interpreting the material evidence, such as those ubiquitous bathing structures, the careful segregation of drains, and the symbolic motifs on seals and pottery. in the frustrating absence of directly decipherable textual confirmations of their belief systems. A quirky or fringe tidbit to consider is the very careful and sophisticated way the Indus people engineered their urban drainage systems. Covered drains ran beneath the streets, carrying wastewater away from individual houses. Many homes had bathrooms with connections to these drains. This meticulous concern for separating clean water sources from wastewater for channeling pollution away from living spaces might not just have been for practical public health, though it certainly served that purpose. It could also reflect a deeper cultural or religious emphasis on maintaining boundaries between pure and impure zones within the city and the household. The design of many IVC houses, often with bathrooms and drains, located on the street-facing side, and with more private courtyards and living quarters situated towards the interior, might subtly reflect this desire to keep potentially polluting activities and substances away from the core, perhaps more sacred living and ritual spaces of the home, thereby maintaining an internal zone of domestic purity, especially crucial when a vulnerable newborn was present. What about things forbidden for the baby itself? Beyond the obvious physical dangers, certain actions or exposures might have been taboo. Perhaps it was forbidden to take the infant out of the house before a certain number of days had passed, or before a specific naming or presentation ceremony had occurred. Maybe it was forbidden to speak certain ill-omened words or to engage in arguments or other negative displays of emotion in the baby's presence, lest these attract harmful influences. It might even have been forbidden to praise the baby too openly or excessively, especially to strangers, for fear of attracting the envious evil eye. If you, as a well-meaning visitor, gushed, "Oh, what an absolutely beautiful, perfectly formed, remarkably non-changeling-like Harappan baby you have there," the proud but spiritually cautious parents would probably immediately touch a protective amulet, discreetly spit 3 times to avert ill luck, and offer a quick silent prayer to a conveniently located household turnip god for continued spiritual protection. Complimenting a baby too effusively in many ancient cultures was like sending out a brightly painted neon-lit invitation to every mischievous sprite and bad luck demon in a 5-mile radius to come and have a closer look. These forbidden things, these carefully observed boundaries of purity and protection, were not about arbitrary restrictions. They were part of a coherent worldview, a way of navigating a world perceived to be full of both benevolent and malevolent forces. They were the invisible fences, the whispered warnings, the sacred cordons drawn around new life, all designed to guard that precious, fragile beginning until the child was strong enough, named enough, and ritually integrated enough to stand more securely on its own 2 tiny Harappan feet. The boundaries of ritual purity have been carefully established around your precious Harappan newborn Egeria. You've seen how specific people, places, and even foods might have been deemed forbidden in the immediate vicinity of this spiritually sensitive new life, all part of an intricate system designed to shield it from contamination and ill fortune. But defense in the ancient Indus world, as in many traditional societies, was rarely just a passive affair of avoiding the negative. It also involved proactive, often daily or cyclical household rituals, a constant gentle reinforcement of protective energies, a continuous warding off of lurking shadows and unseen perils that might seek to harm the infant. It's like having a really good spiritual security system for your Bronze Age home. You don't just lock the doors at night, you also make sure the divine alarm system is armed. The celestial motion detectors are functioning, and you've left a small, respectful offering for the otherworldly night watchman. While the undeciphered script of the Indus Valley civilization keeps the precise details of their daily prayers and domestic incantations hidden from us, the very layout and contents of their well-ordered homes strongly suggest that regular household rituals were an integral part of their family life. A mainstream historical fact is that archaeological excavations of Indus Valley dwellings consistently reveal features such as domestic hearths, which were often central and likely held ritual significance beyond just cooking, private bathing platforms connected to sophisticated drainage systems, implying regular ablutions, both hygienic and possibly ritualistic, and numerous terracotta figurines that are widely interpreted as household deities, ancestral representations, or protective spirits. These all point to a daily life imbued with ritual practice, much of which would have been focused on maintaining the well-being, purity, and safety of the family unit, especially its most vulnerable members. Imagine the Harappan morning Egeria. As the sun begins to bake the brick walls of Mohenjo-Daro, the day within your household might begin with small, almost unconscious acts of ritual. Perhaps the mother upon rising would offer a quiet prayer or a tiny portion of the morning's grain to those terracotta female figurines. We've discussed those silent guardians of the home seeking their continued blessing upon her infant. The hearth fire, a potent symbol of life and continuity, would be carefully tended. Its rekindling each day, perhaps accompanied by a specific utterance or a small offering of gyai or incense, ensuring its protective warmth extended to the entire household, especially the cradle. The Harappan parents' daily mental checklist probably went something like this. 1. Wake up. 2. Try to decipher if that strange squawking sound outside is an auspicious bird or just great Uncle Ur-Namu attempting to sing again. 3. Feed the baby. 4. Change the baby's presumably very eco-friendly Bronze Age and possibly slightly leaky diaper equivalent. 5. Perform the intricate 37-step ritual to appease the benevolent household dust bunny god and simultaneously ward off any rogue sock-stealing bad vibe sprites that might have snuck in overnight. 6. Collapse in a heap for a brief nap. Baby that is not the parent. The parent, as all parents throughout history know, never truly naps again. Reconstructing the specific daily or cyclical household rituals of the Indus Valley people, particularly those aimed at protecting infants from perceived misfortune, illness, or malevolent spiritual influences, relies heavily on interpreting often ambiguous archaeological assemblages discovered within domestic contexts, such as the placement of certain figurines, the nature of hearths, or unusual deposits, and on drawing very cautious analogies from later, historically attested South Asian folk practices or Vedic rituals, as direct contemporary textual evidence from the Indus script itself, remains frustratingly elusive. Yet the human impulse to create daily routines of protection for children is universal. Water, so central to Indus life and purification, would continue to play a role. Perhaps small vessels of lustral water may be drawn from a particularly sacred well, or even the great Indus River itself were kept in the home and used for daily cleansing gestures, a sprinkle on the infant, or a ritual washing of the mother's hands before she nursed her child. The advanced drainage systems in their homes meant that impure water was efficiently carried away, maintaining a physical, and by extension, perhaps a perceived spiritual cleanliness within the dwelling, crucial for an infant's well-being. Those enigmatic Indus seals with their beautifully carved animal motifs and lines of script might also have featured in daily protective rites. While many were likely used for economic or administrative purposes, the pierced ones clearly designed to be worn or hung could have been activated daily. Imagine a parent touching a specific seal, perhaps the powerful unicorn figure or a zebu bull symbolizing strength, to the baby's forehead each morning while murmuring a protective charm whose words are now lost to us. The very act of interacting with these potent symbols could have been seen as a renewal of their protective power. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some of the Indus script signs appear on very small, almost miniature terracotta or faience tablets, or even on tiny copper plates. While their purpose is debated, some scholars have speculatively suggested that these could have been used in household divination rituals, perhaps cast like lots consulted for daily guidance on auspicious actions, or even placed near a child's sleeping area as a form of written symbolic protection. A sort of Bronze Age good luck text message from the spirit world, even if we can no longer read the language it was sent in. The use of sound to ward off evil is another common cross-cultural practice. We've mentioned the possibility of Harappan lullabies containing protective verses and those terracotta rattles that might have served a dual purpose of amusement and apotropaic noisemaking. Perhaps there were specific times of day like twilight, a notoriously liminal and spiritually dangerous period in many cultures, when particular sounds were made in the household to drive away unseen negatives. A rhythmic clapping of hands, the shaking of a rattle, or even specific resonant vocalizations or chants. The amount of protective and possibly quite fragrant incense burned in a Harappan home with a new baby was probably quite significant, ensuring the whole neighborhood smelled faintly of sacred herbs' smoldering embers and a palpable cloud of divine parental anxiety. Is that another generous offering to the great god of uninterrupted naps and colic prevention? A passing neighbor might wonder, or did someone just accidentally set fire to that rather large pile of auspiciously dried river reeds again? And what about those forbidden things in a daily context? to maintain the protective aura around your infant Egeria. Certain actions would likely be prescribed within the household on an ongoing basis, at least during the child's most vulnerable early months. Loud arguments or displays of anger might be forbidden near the baby, lest they attract negative energies or frighten its tender spirit. Bringing certain objects deemed unlucky or ritually impure into the home, or at least into the vicinity of the child, would be carefully avoided. Perhaps specific types of work or household activities were forbidden at certain times of day or night, when the child was sleeping, to avoid disturbing its rest or its protective spiritual guardians. Rule number 1 in a Harappan household with a new baby: thou shalt not engage in loud, angry, and potentially curse-inducing discussions about whose turn it is to go down to the communal well and haul back 3 very heavy jars of water. Especially when the baby is attempting to have a spiritually significant nap and possibly commune with its personal ancestral unicorn spirit. It really disturbs the protective household vibes, you know. These daily household rites, these constant small acts of warding and blessing, would have created a rhythm of protective care around your Indus infant. A web of tangible and intangible safeguards designed to see it safely through the fragile beginnings of life. They speak of a worldview where the mundane and the magical were deeply intertwined, and where the well-being of each new child was a matter of constant loving and ritually reinforced vigilance. Your Harappan household Egeria is now a carefully managed sanctuary for your newborn. A space defined by purifying waters, protective terracotta guardians, nourishing first foods, and a constant gentle hum of daily rituals designed to ward off unseen shadows and ill luck. You've explored how the very fabric of life in these ancient Indus cities, from their sophisticated plumbing to their enigmatic seals, likely played a role in this sacred duty of guarding new life. But now let's turn our gaze to one of the most distinctive and visually captivating aspects of Indus Valley civilization: artistry, their powerful and ubiquitous animal motifs. How might these iconic beasts, the so-called unicorn, the majestic zebu bull, the formidable tiger, the wise elephant, have lent their symbolic strength to the protection of the smallest, most vulnerable members of Harappan society? A mainstream historical fact that immediately strikes anyone studying the IVC is the extraordinary prevalence and artistic sophistication of animal depictions, especially on their thousands of small, square steatite seals. These miniature masterpieces, intricately carved with a confident, naturalistic style, feature a veritable menagerie. The most frequently depicted creature appearing on well over half of all known seals is that enigmatic one-horned bovine, often dubbed the unicorn by early excavators, though it more likely represents a species of wild cattle or aurochs shown in strict profile, or perhaps a mythical composite. Following this in popularity are the powerful humped zebu bull, the elephant, the tiger, the rhinoceros, and the water buffalo, among others. These animals were clearly not just random decorative choices. They must have held profound symbolic and possibly deeply religious meaning for the Indus people, a meaning that, due to the undeciphered script that often accompanies them, remains tantalizingly just beyond our full grasp. It's highly probable that these potent animal symbols played a significant role in the protective sphere surrounding a newborn. Imagine your Harappan infant Egeria sleeping soundly in its wicker cradle. Perhaps a small, specially chosen steatite seal, pierced to be worn as an amulet, is tied to the cradle's side or even placed on a string around the baby's neck, though care would be needed. The animal carved on the seal would not be mere decoration, it would be an active guardian. If it's the famous unicorn, with its single, often dramatically grooved horn and the mysterious ritual stand or incense burner frequently shown before it, its image might be invoking ideas of strength, purity, virility, or even a specific clan totem or tutelary deity. The Harappan unicorn, by the way, wasn't your fluffy, glitter-dusted, rainbow-maned variety from later European medieval fantasies. Oh no. This was a serious, powerful, probably quite stoic, one-horned, bull-like creature that looked like it meant significant business. You definitely wouldn't want it to discover you'd been casually using its sacred ritual incense brazier as a convenient place to park your spare spindle whorls without first asking permission. Its very image, potent and unique, could have been seen as a powerful ward against ill fortune or malevolent spirits trying to approach the infant. Or perhaps the chosen guardian is the magnificent zebu bull with its impressive hump. Powerful dewlap and majestic horns, another very common and clearly revered image on Indus seals. This creature a symbol of strength, fertility, and perhaps leadership or divine power. Think of the later sacredness of cattle in the Indian subcontinent, which might have some incredibly distant Bronze Age echoes here, would be a formidable protector for a fragile newborn. Its image, whether on a seal, a terracotta amulet, or even painted onto a household shrine, could serve as a constant, silent invocation of robust health and vitality for the child. Forget a fluffy teddy bear or a plastic guard dog for your hairpin baby's nursery. They were probably protected by an entire symbolic menagerie of far more impressive and spiritually potent creatures. Don't you worry your tiny, newly swaddled head, little one. A Harappan parent might have silently communicated through these symbols. The mighty terracotta zebu bull will diligently fend off any bad dreams or unwelcome night terrors. The little clay elephant figurine will gradually imbue you with profound wisdom, though that might take a few decades to fully kick in. And that rather fierce-looking miniature terracotta tiger, well, he's mostly here to look incredibly cool. Ensure no one steals your barley porridge and possibly scare away any overly enthusiastic, unsolicited divine tax collectors who might come knocking. The precise identification and exact symbolic significance of the so-called Indus unicorn, whether it indeed represents a real animal species like an aurochs or a type of wild cattle meticulously depicted in perfect profile, so that only one horn is visible. A purely mythical creature unique to the Indus worldview, a sacred clan totem animal, or perhaps the primary emblem of a specific powerful deity or ruling elite within Harappan society, remains one of the most captivating, frequently debated, and as yet definitively unresolved questions in all of Indus Valley iconography. Its ubiquity, however, strongly suggests it held a place of central importance in their belief system, and thus likely in their protective rituals. Other animals also carried their own symbolic weight. The elephant, with its immense size, strength, and perceived wisdom, could be a powerful guardian. The tiger, a formidable predator of the Indus floodplains, might represent fierce protective power, or a connection to the wilder, more chthonic aspects of nature. The rhinoceros and water buffalo, strong creatures of the riverine environment, could symbolize resilience and life-giving power. Some seals even depict composite animals blending features from different creatures or human-like figures interacting with these animals, hinting at a rich, complex mythology that we can only glimpse. That famous Proto-Shiva seal, for instance, showing a horned, seated figure surrounded by animals, while its interpretation as an early form of the Hindu god Shiva is highly debated and by no means universally accepted, certainly points to powerful human-animal divinity connections that would have informed their worldview and their choice of protective symbols. How would these animal symbols actively guard new life? The most direct way would be through their use as amulets worn by the mother during pregnancy and by the child after birth or hung on the cradle. Their power might also be invoked by placing terracotta animal figurines within the household shrine or in the room where the child slept. The image itself, meticulously carved or molded, was not just a representation. It was believed to embody or channel the protective spirit, the inherent virtues, or the divine essence of the animal it depicted. It was a form of sympathetic magic. By keeping the image of a strong, vital creature close, you hope to imbue the child with those same qualities and shield it from harm. A quirky or fringe tidbit that adds another layer to this is that some Indus seals depict what appear to be processions of animals or animals interacting with sacred trees often identified as the pipal or Ficus religiosa, which is still revered in India today. These scenes hint at complex narratives, myths or rituals where these creatures played active roles, perhaps as guardians of sacred natural spaces, as intermediaries between the human and divine worlds, or as embodiments of specific natural forces or seasonal cycles, all of which could have a bearing on the well-being and auspicious future of a newborn. The strange aspect for us lies in our inability to fully decode their specific meanings. Why was the unicorn so dominant? What was the precise nature of the power attributed to the tiger versus the elephant? What stories lay behind those composite beasts the forbidden might relate to the misuse or disrespect of these sacred animal symbols, or perhaps a prohibition against certain individuals handling or wearing particular animal amulets if they were not of the appropriate clan or status. Trying to definitively decipher what all these Indus animal symbols really meant for a newborn's protection without a readable script is Egeria. A bit like future archaeologists in the year 6000 AD, trying to understand early 21st century human emotional expression and social rituals based purely on a recovered cache of discarded smartphones containing nothing but a vast, unannotated collection of emoji. They might ponder, scratching their futuristic heads. This repeated sequence of a tiny aubergine symbol followed by a winking face, and then what appears to be a small, flaming pictograph. Clearly, this must represent a profound agricultural metaphor of cosmic fertility, combined with a ritual invocation for a successful harvest and protection against unseasonable blizzards. Or maybe it was just someone's rather enthusiastic plans for a spicy vegetarian barbecue that evening. The potential for misinterpretation is vast, but the underlying human impulse to use powerful symbols to protect our young is unmistakable. Your precious Harappan infant Egeria is now a tiny, cherished presence in its baked brick home, surrounded by the constant, if largely unseen, efforts of its family to ward off the shadows of ill luck and malevolent forces. You've imagined the purifying waters, the terracotta guardians, the potent animal symbols, and the daily household rites that likely formed a protective web around this new life. But there is one element, one absolutely crucial aspect of welcoming a newborn in almost every human society that remains a profound, tantalizing enigma when we peer into the world of the Indus Valley civilization: the bestowing of a name. What do they call their children? How are these names chosen? And what rituals, what peculiar or sacred utterances accompanied this fundamental act of giving an identity? Here, the otherwise remarkably articulate material culture of the Indus people falls into an almost complete and deeply frustrating silence. The universal importance of naming a child cannot be overstated. A name is far more than a mere label. It is a conferral of personhood, a social anchor, a link to lineage and community. In many ancient worldviews, including very likely that of the Indus people, a name was believed to hold inherent power, to be inextricably bound to an individual's essence, their fate, even their soul. An unnamed child might be seen as incomplete, not yet fully human, more vulnerable to being reclaimed by the spirit world, or overlooked by benevolent ancestral or divine protectors. The act of naming, therefore, was a critical rite of passage, transforming a mere biological being into a recognized social entity. Yet, when we try to understand Harappan naming practices, we hit that infamous brick wall, or rather that beautifully carved but stubbornly mute soapstone seal. A mainstream historical fact is that despite the discovery of thousands of short inscriptions in the Indus script on seals, pottery, copper tablets, and other artifacts, this elegant writing system remains undeciphered. Decades of intensive research by brilliant scholars worldwide, employing a vast array of methodologies, have yielded many fascinating theories and potential partial insights. But as of yet, no proposed decipherment has achieved widespread scholarly consensus. We can recognize recurring signs, analyze their statistical frequencies, and observe their patterns of use, but we cannot with any certainty read what they say. This means that the personal names of Indus individuals, the names they called each other, the names they whispered to their newborns, are currently inaccessible to us. The Harappan equivalent of Baby's First Name Book Popular Choices from 2500 BC, including He Who Wrestles Crocodiles and She of the Auspiciously Shaped Barley Loaf, simply hasn't been translated yet because we haven't found the cuneiform to Indus script Rosetta Stone. This is the great Indus naming enigma. We can see their sophisticated cities, admire their intricate jewelry handle, their standardized weights and measures, and even marvel at their advanced plumbing, but we cannot call them by their names. The ongoing attempts to decipher the Indus script involve numerous complex methodologies, often including statistical analysis of sign frequencies and positional patterns, detailed comparisons with later Indian scripts like Brahmi or other contemporaneous Bronze Age writing systems from Mesopotamia or Elam, and concerted efforts to explore potential linguistic affiliations for the underlying language, with candidates ranging from Proto-Dravidian or Indo-Aryan to various language isolates or even unknown language families. However, the brevity of most inscriptions, the lack of bilingual texts, and the unique nature of many of the signs continue to make decipherment an exceptionally challenging puzzle for archaeologists and linguists. So how did they choose names for their children? These people whose own names are lost to us? We can only speculate, drawing very cautious analogies from what we know about naming practices in other ancient cultures, or from much later traditions in the Indian subcontinent that might preserve incredibly distant echoes. Like the Celtic traditions we've explored Egeria, it's highly probable that Indus names carried significant meaning. They might have been derived from deities they worshipped, whose identities we can only guess at from iconographic clues like that seated proto-Shiva figure or the numerous mother goddess figurines. Names could have been linked to respected ancestors to natural phenomena, like the great river itself, or auspicious celestial events to desirable personal qualities, such as strength, wisdom, or beauty, or perhaps to specific circumstances surrounding the child's birth. The name given to your Indus baby was probably not just a random assortment of pleasing syllables. It was almost certainly chosen with great care, believed to hold power, and intended to shape or reflect the child's destiny. Your Indus baby now has a name. It's a beautiful name. It probably means something incredibly profound and spiritually resonant, like he who swims with auspicious Indus river carp under a benevolently waxing moon. Or, for all we know, it could just mean he who frequently and with great gusto spits up his morning barley porridge all over father's second-best cotton tunic. The true beauty of an undeciphered script for our sleepy purposes lies in the endless, gently amusing, speculative possibilities. And what of the ceremony itself, the moment of bestowing this unspoken to us name? Again, we rely on imagination, guided by common human ritual patterns. It would undoubtedly have been a significant event. Perhaps the father, as in many patrilineal societies, had the primary role in officially giving the name, thereby acknowledging the child as his own and incorporating it into his lineage. Maybe the mother or a revered elder woman, or even a specialized ritual practitioner, a Harappan priest or priestess whose existence is inferred from structures like the Great Bath, and certain figurines would have whispered the name, first imbuing it with sacred intent and protective power before its public announcement. The Harappan naming ceremony, the proud parents gazed lovingly at their swaddled infant. The local seal carver / priest, we're just guessing here, but he looks important. With that impressive headdress, holds up a freshly inscribed miniature clay tablet or perhaps a newly carved amuletic seal. By the power vested in me by the great zebu bull of the western granary and the sacred peepal tree that whispers by the riverbank, he might intone in a language we can't understand, we shall call him Squiggle Unicorn Fishman, holding what appears to be a very important jar with an impressive hat. May he bring much, whatever that combination of symbols actually means, to our great and orderly city. And all the assembled relatives would nod wisely. A few of them surreptitiously trying to copy down the new pictograms on a spare shard of pottery, pretending they totally understood its profound cosmological significance. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that some of the most commonly recurring signs in the Indus script are the fish symbol in various forms and the jar symbol. Scholars have endlessly debated their meaning. Could the fish represent a star, a god, a kinship group, or simply a fish? Was the jar a unit of measure, a container for sacred offerings, or something else entirely? If a child's name or a protective phrase associated with its naming incorporated these common yet enigmatic symbols, their intended power and meaning would have been crystal clear to a Harappan, but remain a tantalizing mystery to us. The power of an unspoken name, unspoken to us that is a curious thing, Egeria. For the Indus child, that name, whatever its specific phonetic form and semantic content, would have been the key to its identity, its place in the world, its connection to its family and its gods. It would have been whispered in lullabies, called out in play, invoked in blessings, and perhaps one day inscribed on its own personal seal, a mark of its unique existence within that vast ancient civilization. The silence of the script doesn't negate the power of those lost names. It only deepens the mystery and our fascination with the lives they represented. We may not be able to read what they wrote, but we can still sense the profound human need to name, to define, to protect, and to welcome each new life with purpose and hope. The profound enigma of your Harappan baby's name? Egeria, those silent symbols whispered into existence but lost to our modern understanding, still hangs gently in the warm Indus Valley air. Within the protective confines of your baked brick home, the infant has been ritually cleansed, adorned with enigmatic terracotta guardians, nourished and perhaps soothed by lullabies whose melodies we can only dream of. But what of the wider world beyond your household walls? How did this highly organized, sophisticated Bronze Age society with its meticulously planned cities and its evidence of complex social structures formally acknowledge and embrace its newest members? The city itself, be it Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa, must have had ways of recognizing and integrating these tiny, precious additions to its populace. A mainstream historical fact is that the Indus Valley civilization, with its remarkably uniform material culture across a vast geographical area, its standardized weights and measures, its intricate drainage systems, and its monumental public structures like granaries and the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro clearly possessed a high degree of social organization and communal coordination. Such a well-ordered society would almost certainly have had established customs, if not formal legal mechanisms for acknowledging the arrival of new individuals and integrating them into the broader civic and social fabric. Becoming an official citizen of Harappa or a recognized member of a Mohenjo-Daro trading guild probably involved a bit more than just successfully being born within the city walls. There was likely a form to be filled out on a very small, very damp clay tablet, naturally probably in triplicate using a stylus that was constantly running out of wedge-shaped ink. Name, Squigglefish Unicorn with A, slightly jaunty hat. Date of birth, approximately the third monsoon after the Great Zebu Uprising that nobody talks about anymore. Profession future slightly disgruntled, barley farmer. Part-time ceremonial unicorn feeder, aspiring carver of extremely tiny seals. A bureaucracy even in the deep Bronze Age has a way of making its presence felt. While direct textual evidence for specific civic birth registration or public welcoming ceremonies is absent due to that ever-present issue of the undeciphered script, we can speculate based on the societal structure implied by the archaeology. The very existence of large planned cities with populations numbering in the tens of thousands necessitates some form of administration, some way of keeping track of people for purposes of resource allocation, like grain from those enormous granaries labor organization, or perhaps even civic or religious duties. Could there have been a system, however rudimentary by our standards, for noting new births within a particular district or kin group of the city? Perhaps a mark made on a perishable register or a symbolic token presented to a local administrator or temple authority. Whether the Indus Valley civilization was governed by a highly centralized state structure, a collection of more loosely allied city-states, each with its own ruling elite, or perhaps a more complex and less hierarchical system involving powerful religious figures or influential merchant guilds, and precisely how such overarching governance structures might have influenced or even mandated specific public rituals for acknowledging new citizens or formally incorporating members into defined social units are fundamental and highly debated questions that remain largely unanswered due to the silence of their script and the often ambiguous nature of the archaeological record when it comes to interpreting political organization. It's plausible that once the initial period of extreme vulnerability and postpartum seclusion for mother and child had passed, a period dictated by those purity concepts and forbidden things we've pondered, there might have been a more public presentation of the infant, not just to the extended kin, but to a wider segment of the immediate community or neighborhood. This could have taken place within a communal courtyard shared by several households, or perhaps at a local shrine or a designated public gathering space within the intricately planned city blocks. Imagine the Harappan baby's first official public outing, Egeria. It probably wasn't just a casual stroll in a Bronze Age baby chariot down the main, meticulously brick-paved thoroughfare, though they did have some wonderfully cute miniature terracotta carts that looked suspiciously like toy chariots. It was more likely a carefully orchestrated event, a formal debut. Behold, esteemed citizens of Mohenjo-Daro Block D, Residential Sector 7. A proud father might announce, holding aloft his now somewhat less tiny and hopefully less colicky offspring. Another tiny future taxpayer. Another cherished new member of our glorious, exceptionally well-drained, and hygienically superior metropolis, has successfully navigated the perils of early infancy and is now ready to be officially counted amongst us. Let the ritual distribution of appropriately sized celebratory barley cakes and perhaps a small symbolic grain ration commence. The ubiquitous Indus seals those small masterpieces of miniature art might also have played a role in this broader social acknowledgement. If as many scholars believe these seals were badges of identity, indicating ownership, family affiliation, professional status, or membership in a particular group or clan. Then perhaps the formal bestowing of a family seal upon a child, or at least upon their household in their name at a certain age, or the first use of such a seal in a transaction related to the child, could have served as a form of public recognition of their lineage and their place within the city's complex economic and social network. A quirky or fringe tidbit to consider is the sheer number of identical, seemingly mass-produced small terracotta items found across numerous IVC sites. Certain types of bangles, specific styles of beads, or simple pottery forms. This standardization points to a very integrated economic system and perhaps widely shared cultural practices. Could it be that upon a child's formal welcoming into the wider community, there was a ritual exchange or offering of such standardized, readily available goods? Perhaps each family presented a small symbolic token, a string of identical faience beads, a particular type of small clay pot, to the community's representative or a local shrine upon the registration or public acknowledgement of their new child, these items, then perhaps being redistributed or used in further communal rituals, symbolizing the child's entry into this shared material and social world. The public spaces of Indus cities like the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro or the elevated citadel mounds found in several major centers were clearly designed for communal activities. While we don't know if newborns were ever directly involved in rituals at these major public monuments, it seems unlikely for such vulnerable individuals. The very existence of these spaces indicates a society that valued communal gathering and shared civic or religious identity. The eventual integration of a child into these public spheres of life would have begun with these earlier, more intimate acknowledgments within the household, the kin group, and the immediate neighborhood. And what about those forbidden things in a public context? Just as certain actions or people might have been taboo within the home around a newborn, there would likely have been restrictions on when and how a very young child was first introduced to the wider, potentially more dangerous or spiritually noisy public spaces of the city. It might have been forbidden to take an infant to the bustling marketplace or near certain industrial areas with their smoke and clamor, or to specific sacred sites deemed too powerful or inappropriate for such a young soul, until they had reached a certain age or undergone further protective or initiatory rites. The city's embrace then Egeria was likely a gradual, carefully managed process. From the private rituals of the household to the welcoming by the extended kin to a more formal, if still largely invisible to us acknowledgement, by the wider community or its representatives, each step served to weave the new life more securely into the well-ordered, sophisticated, and deeply enigmatic urban world of the Indus Valley civilization. The silent stones of their cities still hold the secrets of these precise rituals, but the underlying human impulse to formally welcome, protect, and integrate each new member into the collective is a story that transcends time and undeciphered scripts. Imagine the local neighborhood welcoming committee in Harappa, probably led by a very officious-looking lady with an impressive array of terracotta bangles and a no-nonsense attitude. Oh, another one wonderful. Does it possess the regulation number of toes and fingers? Excellent. Has it been properly purified with sacred river water and smoke from auspicious dung cakes? Superb! Here's your standard issue tiny clay card, a complimentary I Heart Indus Unicorns, probably by my amulet, and a list of this week's approved barley porridge recipes. Welcome to the meticulously planned grid-based neighborhood, little one. Try not to block the drains. Your Harappan infant Egeria having been ritually cleansed, symbolically named. In ways we can only guess at and formally acknowledged by its kin, and perhaps even the wider urban community, now begins the universal journey from helpless newborn to curious mobile toddler. The intense period of initial vulnerability with its constant warding off of unseen perils and meticulous adherence to purity boundaries gradually gives way to a new set of challenges and delights those first wobbly steps, those first garbled attempts at speech in that beautiful lost Indus language, and the dawning exploration of a fascinating Bronze Age world. And thanks to the remarkable preservation of certain artifacts, we can catch a few precious, if frustratingly silent glimpses into what childhood with its tiny toys and first tentative explorations might have been like in these ancient cities of the Indus. A mainstream historical fact that brings a smile to the face of any historian or archaeologist is that excavations at numerous Indus Valley civilization sites have uncovered a delightful variety of objects clearly identifiable as children's toys. These aren't just crude, unformed lumps of clay. Many are charmingly crafted and show a real understanding of what might amuse or engage a young child. This tells us unequivocally that play was an integral part of childhood in Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, just as it is in any human society. The Indus people, for all their sophisticated urban planning and enigmatic script, clearly understood the importance of joy and imaginative development for their youngest members. Imagine your little Harappan toddler, Egeria, now sturdy on its feet, toddling through the paved courtyard of your baked brick home. What might it be playing with? Archaeologists have found an enchanting array of terracotta baked clay animal figurines that seem perfectly suited for small hands. There are monkeys cleverly designed so they could perhaps slide down a string, bulls with heads that could be made to nod or were articulated in some way, little birds sometimes with holes for wheels or a string to pull them along, and even charmingly detailed squirrels, dogs, and sheep. Indus Valley kids, it seems, had some seriously cool artisan-crafted action figures for the Bronze Age. You can just picture a tiny Harappan child making their little clay zabu bowl, have a very serious, if entirely silent conversation with a terracotta rhinoceros perhaps debating the proper distribution of miniature fodder pellets. Their version of a Happy Meal toy collection, accompanying their daily portion of barley porridge and goat's milk, was probably way ahead of its time in terms of craftsmanship and potential for imaginative play. Then there are the miniature carts. A particularly quirky or fringe tidbit is that some of these tiny IVC terracotta carts are surprisingly detailed, often with solid or spoked wheels that actually turn, and sometimes even complete with yokes for equally tiny model oxen or zebu bulls. They are perfect little replicas of the larger functional bullock carts that would have been a common sight in the streets and surrounding farmlands used for transporting goods and agricultural produce. These miniature carts suggest a real delight in creating realistic miniatures for play, allowing children to mimic the adult activities they saw around them. Or perhaps they were even used as votive offerings by or for children, symbolizing hopes for future prosperity and abundance. Whistles often shaped like birds have also been found ready to create a cheerful, or perhaps after the 10th hour of continuous whistling, slightly less cheerful for the parent's soundtrack to a Harappan childhood. Marbles made of baked clay or semi-precious stone and various types of dice, some cubical like modern dice, others long and rectangular, suggest that games of chance and skill were popular. Archaeologists have even found what appear to be boards for games, though the precise rules of Harappan snakes and ladders, or Mohenjo-Daro Monopoly, where you probably tried to acquire all the best granaries and avoid landing on pay tax and carnelian beads, are alas lost to us. Imagine trying to play an ancient Harappan board game with your little one Egeria, without the benefit of a clearly written rulebook because it's all rendered in those beautiful but completely undeciphered Indus squiggles. Okay, my little sunbeam, does your tiny terracotta zebu counter move 2 squares forward if it lands on the pipal leaf symbol? Or does it get eaten by my rather smug-looking unicorn counter? And what on earth does this peculiar fish symbol combined with 3 vertical lines actually mean? Is it a penalty, or do I get extra tiny barley snacks from the communal storage jar? The possibilities for creative and entirely anachronistic rule invention are endless. The extent to which the many objects identified by archaeologists as toys found at Indus sites were exclusively designed and used for children's secular play versus also serving more complex ritualistic votive or even educational functions within their society is a topic that often sparks lively discussion and careful consideration among researchers. As the line between what constitutes play and what constitutes ritual or learning can be remarkably blurred in ancient cultures, especially for objects used by or given to children. A small animal figurine might be a beloved plaything, but also a protective amulet, or an object used to teach a child about the local fauna or its symbolic importance. The environment for these first steps in early exploration would have been the well-built homes and, at least in some areas, the surprisingly orderly streets of their city. The houses, often with multiple rooms and private courtyards, would offer relatively safe spaces for play. The advanced drainage systems might have even reduced some of the hazards of wastewater and refuse that plagued other ancient cities. However, keeping a curious Harappan toddler safe was still probably a full-time high-alert job for any parent or caregiver. No, little Og, please don't attempt to lick that interesting iridescent green residue you found on that very ancient pottery shard. It might be a rare copper oxide, or it could just be something the cat brought in. And please, for the love of the great unicorn, stop trying to use the main municipal drain outlet as a personal water slide. The highly respected sanitation engineers of this fine city worked very, very hard on that advanced hydraulic system, and it is not a water park. As children grew, they would learn through observation and imitation, absorbing the skills and customs of their society. Boys might watch their fathers or other male relatives, engaged in crafts like pottery bead making or metalworking, or learn the basics of farming or herding. Girls would learn the intricate arts of spinning, weaving, and household management from their mothers and other female kin. And all children would learn the stories, the songs, the social rules, and the religious beliefs of their people through a rich oral tradition, the specific words of which are now lost but whose importance is undeniable. The forbidden things for an Indus child would likely have revolved around safety, physical and spiritual respect for elders, and sacred things and adherence to social norms. They would be taught not to play near dangerous areas like open wells firing kilns, or the deep swift currents of the Indus River without supervision. They would learn not to touch or misuse sacred objects found in household shrines or public ritual areas. Disrespect for elders or a breach of the community's rules for polite behavior would surely be corrected. And just as for infants, certain foods or actions might still be considered unsuitable or unlucky for young children until they reached a certain age or underwent further rites of passage. These tiny toys, these imagined first steps on baked brick pavements, offer us a poignant, if fleeting, connection to the lived experience of childhood. In a civilization that, despite its grandeur and sophistication, still cherished the simple joys and universal challenges of raising its youngest members, guarding their new lives as they began to explore the wonders and perils of their ancient Indus world. Your Harappan child Ageria has now progressed from a vulnerable newborn to a playful toddler, surrounded by those charming terracotta toys, the nodding bulls, the wheeled birds, the miniature carts, all testament to a society that, despite its enigmatic silence, clearly acknowledged and catered to the world of its children. We've imagined the daily household rituals, the protective power of animal symbols, the profound mystery of their unspoken names, and the ways in which these new lives were embraced by their kin and their meticulously planned cities. But our sleepy exploration of these fragile beginnings in the Indus Valley must also, with gentle solemnity, touch upon a sadder, yet equally universal aspect of ancient life, the frequent reality of early departures of infant and child mortality. What do the burial customs of the Indus Valley civilization, particularly for their youngest members, tell us about their attitudes towards loss, their beliefs about the afterlife, and how they guarded life even at its very end? The stark truth, as we've touched upon, is that in the Bronze Age, indeed throughout most of human history, until relatively recent times, life for an infant was an incredibly precarious affair. So despite all the loving care, the purifying waters, the whispered charms, and the presumed protection of those terracotta mother goddesses and unicorn seals, it's an unfortunate certainty that many Harappan babies and young children would have succumbed to illness, accidents, or the myriad other dangers of their world. It's a sobering reminder that even in a remarkably sophisticated and well-organized Bronze Age city with truly excellent municipal plumbing, just successfully being a baby and surviving to toddlerhood was often a high-stakes daily occupation with no guarantee of long-term success. When these young lives did flicker out too soon, how did their families respond? What can their burial practices reveal? A mainstream historical fact is that archaeological evidence from various Indus Valley civilization sites, including major urban centers like Harappa, particularly its famous cemetery R37 and earlier cemetery areas, and Mohenjo-Daro, shows varied and distinct burial practices for infants and young children, which often differed in notable ways from typical adult inhumations. This suggests that the Harappans, like many cultures, had specific rituals and perhaps differing beliefs concerning the very young deceased. One of the most common and distinctive forms of infant burial found in the IVC is pot burial. Very young infants, often newborns or those only a few months old, were sometimes interred in large earthenware pottery jars. These jars, essentially big clay pots, were then typically buried beneath the floors of houses within the residential courtyards, or sometimes in designated cemetery areas, but often segregated from adult graves. This practice of pot burial for infants is not unique to the Indus Valley. It's a custom found in many diverse ancient cultures across the globe and across different time periods. Its widespread nature suggests it tapped into some deep, perhaps almost universal human ideas about death and new life. Being buried in a large pottery jar, it's like the ultimate Bronze Age return to sender spiritual address unknown, but hopefully somewhere peaceful and filled with celestial milk, kind of final packaging. It was practical, it was symbolic, and it probably also served the rather grim but necessary purpose of keeping scavenging animals away from the tiny, precious remains. What was the symbolism behind these pot burials? The pot itself is often interpreted by archaeologists and anthropologists as a kind of artificial womb, a comforting enclosing space intended to return the infant gently to the earth, or perhaps to facilitate its rebirth or safe passage into the afterlife. Placing the infant burial within the confines of the home, under the floor or in the courtyard, might also suggest a desire to keep the spirit of the beloved child close to the family, to protect it even in death, or perhaps a belief that its spirit might be reborn into the same family line. Older children in the Indus Valley, if they died before reaching adulthood, were more commonly buried in simple pit graves, often in an extended or sometimes slightly flexed position, similar to many adult burials. These graves are usually found within the formal cemetery areas. The key difference often lies in the quantity and type of grave goods, if any, interred with them. This brings us to the poignant question of grave goods for IVE infants and children. What, if anything, did these ancient people send with their little ones on their journey into the unknown? Sometimes infants in pot burials are found with a few small, simple offerings. Perhaps a tiny pottery vessel, a miniature version of those spouted cups we imagined as ancient sippy cups, a few shell beads, or a simple terracotta bangle. Older children might have slightly more, but generally the grave goods found with non-adults in the IVC are less numerous and less elaborate than those accompanying some high-status adult burials, which themselves are not overly ostentatious compared to, say, ancient Egypt. The interpretation of the varying modes of Indus infant and child burial, such as the specific choice between pot burials versus pit graves, and the noticeable presence or marked absence of particular types of grave goods, and what these observed differences might truly signify regarding the child's perceived social status at different early ages, their level of recognized personhood within Harappan society, or the community's specific familial or broader societal beliefs about death. Mourning and the nature of the afterlife for the very young remains a complex and often emotionally charged area of archaeological research and ongoing scholarly discussion. Did the simplicity of offerings for many infant burials mean they were valued less? Not necessarily. It could reflect a belief that very young children, not having fully participated in adult life or accumulated worldly possessions, did not require the same elaborate funerary provisions as adults for their journey to or existence in the afterlife. Or perhaps their passage to the other world was seen as easier, less fraught, requiring fewer material aids. The undeciphered script, once again Egeria, holds the key to their precise beliefs, a key we do not yet possess. Did Harappan babies, one wonders with a gentle sigh, get to take their favorite intricately carved terracotta nodding bull toy with them to the great Bronze Age playroom in the sky? The archaeological record suggests sometimes, perhaps. Other times, it seems it was just a very tiny, unadorned pottery vessel, possibly intended for a sip of celestial barley porridge, or maybe just to hold the tears of their grieving parents. Afterlife amenities in the Indus Valley civilization were probably a bit hit or miss, especially if you hadn't yet learned to fill out the proper cuneiform, or rather Indus script customs declaration forms upon arrival. A quirky or fringe tidbit concerning IVC burials in general, not just for infants, is the usual north-south orientation of the body in extended inhumations, with the head typically towards the north. While the exact religious or cosmological reason for this specific orientation is unknown, its consistency suggests a deeply held belief or tradition regarding the proper way to face the afterlife or the realm of the ancestors. Whether this applied as strictly to pot burials is harder to say, but it points to a structured, ritualized approach to death. The very act of careful burial, even in a simple pot under a house floor, speaks of love, grief, and a desire to treat the small body with respect. It implies a belief in some form of continued existence, or a journey to another realm, however vaguely that might have been conceptualized. These early departures, these fragile beginnings so quickly ended, would have been a source of immense sorrow for Indus families, just as they are for parents everywhere. The silent tiny graves in the dust of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are a poignant reminder of the precariousness of life in the ancient world and of the enduring human need to make sense of loss and to honor even the briefest of lives. The rituals for guarding new life would have been paralleled, one imagines, by equally significant, if somber, rituals for accompanying these little souls on their final, untimely journey. The poignant silence of those ancient Indus infant burials. Ageria with their tiny clay pots, and the profound unanswered questions they pose about Harappan beliefs in loss and an afterlife for the very young, still hangs gently in the air of our sleepy contemplation. We've journeyed through the reconstructed rituals of birth, purification, naming, and protection in these magnificent Bronze Age cities, piecing together a fragile picture of how a new life was guarded and welcomed. But what happened after these cities, with their orderly streets and enigmatic script, began to decline and eventually fade from prominence around 1900 BCE? Did all their unique traditions, their peculiar ways of understanding the world and ushering new souls into it, simply vanish without a trace into the dust of millennia? Or can we perhaps detect faint, intriguing echoes of these ancient Indus practices reverberating downstream, as it were, in historically attested cultures and traditions of the Indian subcontinent? This question of continuity versus discontinuity is one of the most fascinating and hotly debated topics in the study of South Asian ancient history. A mainstream historical fact is that while the great urban phase of the Indus Valley civilization declined for a complex array of reasons, possibly including climate change shifts in river courses, internal societal pressures, or the arrival of new peoples, there is ongoing scholarly debate and intensive research into the extent to which certain IVC cultural elements, religious beliefs, and social practices may have survived, transformed, and ultimately contributed to the development of later historical civilizations and traditions in India, including the Vedic culture and subsequent Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions. Trying to find direct, unambiguous IVC echoes in these later Indian traditions is like listening for a specific, very faint, 4,000-year-old whisper in the middle of a very, very loud, millennia-long, and incredibly vibrant historical rock concert. You might catch a familiar-sounding melodic riff, or a recurring rhythmic pattern now and then, but definitively proving it's the exact same tune played by the original Harappan band rather than a case of independent invention or convergent cultural evolution is exceptionally tricky, especially since the Harappans inconveniently forgot to leave us their original sheet music in a language we can actually read. Nevertheless, the search for these potential echoes, particularly in areas related to ritual purity, fertility cults, and perhaps even certain foundational concepts of life cycle rites, is a compelling one. Consider the profound emphasis on water and ritual bathing in the Indus Valley civilization, so dramatically exemplified by the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro and the ubiquitous private bathing platforms. Could this deep Harappan reverence for water and purification have contributed in some way to the central importance of ritual bathing, sacred rivers like the Ganges, and concepts of ritual purity, shaucha, that are so prominent in later Hinduism and other Indic religions? Many scholars find this a plausible, if not definitively provable, connection. Then there are those thousands of terracotta female figurines often interpreted as mother goddesses or fertility deities. While the specific IVC beliefs surrounding them are unknown, the widespread and enduring tradition of goddess worship in many forms throughout later Indian history, Shaktism, village goddesses, etc., makes one wonder if some very ancient pre-Indo-Aryan indigenous traditions of revering the divine feminine, perhaps with roots in the Harappan agricultural worldview, survived and resurfaced or blended with later incoming belief systems. The nature and degree of cultural continuity between the Indus Valley civilization and subsequent Vedic or classical Indian cultures represent one of the most complex and fiercely contentious areas of South Asian archaeology and ancient history, with scholars presenting a vast spectrum of diverse arguments based on often ambiguous material culture, highly contested linguistic hypotheses regarding the Indus script and its potential relationship to Dravidian or Indo-Aryan language families, and widely varying interpretations of religious symbolism and iconographic parallels. What about specific rituals for newborns? Could any of the protective charms, naming customs, or purification rites we've imagined for Harappan babies have left faint traces in later South Asian folk practices, or even in more formalized Sanskritic traditions? This is where speculation must be at its most cautious. While many later Indian traditions have elaborate ceremonies for newborns like the Hindu Jatakarma and Samskara, or birthrights and the namakarana, or naming ceremony, directly linking their specific elements back over a gap of many centuries to undeciphered IVC practices, is fraught with difficulty. However, underlying themes, the vulnerability of the infant, the need for purification, the power of a name, the importance of auspicious timing, the use of protective amulets, and the communal celebration of new life. These are such universal human concerns that similar ritual responses might well have arisen independently or have very deep shared prehistoric roots across the subcontinent. If only those beautifully carved Harappan seals would just clearly tell us PS. Regarding infant care, our great-great-great-grandkids will eventually be really into elaborate astrological charts for choosing auspicious names, and they'll also develop a strong belief that feeding a baby its first solid food with a silver spoon is an excellent idea. Just an FYI for future reference. It would certainly save generations of scholars an enormous amount of very intense debate and meticulous pottery shard analysis. The old and now largely superseded theories of a violent Aryan invasion destroying the Indus cities often posited a complete cultural break. More recent scholarship tends to emphasize a more complex picture of gradual decline transformation and potential interaction and assimilation between late Harappan populations and incoming Indo-Aryan speaking groups, or the internal evolution of indigenous cultures. In such a scenario, it's more plausible that some older traditions, particularly at the village or folk level, might have persisted adapted, and eventually blended with new cultural influences. A quirky or fringe tidbit that often comes up in these discussions of continuity is the famous Pashupati seal from Mohenjo-Daro. This seal depicts a seated horned figure in a yogic-like posture surrounded by animals: an elephant, a tiger, a rhinoceros, and a buffalo, with two deer beneath the seat. Early excavators like Sir John Marshall famously and rather controversially interpreted this figure as a proto-Shiva, a very early precursor to the great Hindu god Shiva in his aspect as Pashupati, lord of animals. While this specific interpretation is now highly debated and viewed with considerable skepticism by many modern scholars, who point out alternative interpretations or the lack of direct, continuous iconographic links, it beautifully exemplifies the enduring human desire to find connections, to trace threads of cultural continuity across the vast expanses of time, and to see in the enigmatic art of the Indus Valley the distant seeds of later more familiar Indian traditions. Ultimately, Ageria. As you reflect on those imagined Harappan rituals for guarding new life, the question of their downstream echoes remains a tantalizing one. The Indus River itself continued to flow, nourishing new civilizations and cultures along its banks. It's almost impossible to believe that everything of that vast and sophisticated Bronze Age world simply vanished without leaving some imprint, however subtle or transformed, on the peoples and traditions that followed. The challenge lies in discerning those faint ancient whispers amidst the louder, clearer voices of later recorded history. Imagine ancient cultural traditions like a massive ongoing potluck dinner that has lasted for several millennia. The Indus Valley civilization undoubtedly brought some very interesting, beautifully made, and perhaps slightly spicy foundational dishes to the table. Later cultures arrived, added their own unique ingredients, spices, and cooking techniques. What you end up with is a wonderfully rich, incredibly diverse, and deliciously complex culinary and cultural landscape. But trying to precisely identify who brought the original unmodified recipe for that mysterious unicorn-themed dip from 4,000 years ago. That's a real historical head-scratcher requiring a very discerning palate and an awful lot of patient sifting through ancient ingredient lists. Our sleepy journey through the ancient Indus Valley, Ageria, tracing the potential echoes of Harappan traditions in later South Asian cultures, has been a fascinating, if necessarily speculative, exploration. We've seen how hints of their reverence for water, their possible goddess worship, or their use of symbolic animal motifs might have trickled down through the centuries, subtly influencing the vast and complex tapestry of subsequent civilizations on the subcontinent. But now, as our imaginative archaeological dig draws to a close, we must return to the profound, overarching enigma of the Indus Valley civilization itself, the enduring hush that surrounds so many of its deepest beliefs and most intimate rituals, especially those concerning the guarding of new life. A mainstream historical fact, and one that frames almost every discussion of this remarkable Bronze Age culture, is that Despite decades of extensive archaeological excavation and intensive research at sites like Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa Dolavira, and Lothal, the Indus Valley civilization, continues to hold many of its most profound mysteries close. The primary reason for this, as we have lamented throughout our journey, is its still undeciphered script. Those thousands of elegant, enigmatic symbols, so beautifully carved onto steatite seals or incised onto pottery and copper tablets, remain a silent challenge to modern scholarship. Without the ability to read their words, we are denied direct access to their own voices, their own explanations of their cosmology, their religious beliefs, their social structures, and the specific meanings they attached to their intricate rituals and potent symbols. The Indus Valley civilization is like that fascinating, incredibly intelligent, and remarkably stylish dinner guest who says almost absolutely nothing throughout the entire elaborate multi-course meal. Meal just smiles serenely and enigmatically, perhaps occasionally gesturing with a perfectly crafted carnelian bead, and then departs, leaving you utterly charmed, deeply impressed, and desperately, achingly wondering what profound thoughts, what secret recipes, what earth-shattering philosophical insights were percolating behind those serene, unreadable eyes. And also whether they actually enjoyed the specially prepared barley cakes you offered. This hush of Harappa, this silence from the stones and seals, is particularly poignant when we try to reconstruct something as personal and culturally specific as the rituals for welcoming and protecting newborns. We see the material evidence, the well-planned houses with their private bathing areas, the ubiquitous terracotta female figurines, the charming miniature toys, the carefully interred infant pot burials. We can infer with a high degree of confidence that these people, like all human societies, valued their children immensely and invested considerable effort in their care and protection. We can deduce a societal concern for purity from their water systems, a belief in symbolic power from their amulets and animal art. But the specifics, the words of the lullabies, the names of the gods invoked the exact sequence of a naming ceremony, the precise nature of the forbidden things that might endanger a baby, these remain largely lost in the soft, deep dust of 4 millennia. Trying to reconstruct precise IVC baby rituals from a few terracotta figurines, some excellent drains, and a collection of undeciphered unicorn seals is a bit like trying to write a full, nuanced biography of a complex historical figure based only on their surviving grocery list, their collection of decorative garden gnomes, and perhaps a blurry photograph of their left ear. You can certainly make some very educated, highly plausible guesses, but you might just possibly miss a few key plot points and subtle character motivations along the way. Yet even within this framework of acknowledged mystery, what can we say with some measure of sleepy certainty about how the Indus people guarded new life? We can be sure they understood its fragility. The archaeological record of infant burials, however interpreted, speaks to the reality of early loss. Their efforts at purification, their probable use of protective charms and symbols all point to a worldview that acknowledged unseen dangers and sought to mitigate them through ritual action. Their sophisticated urban environment, with its emphasis on order and hygiene, would have provided a relatively secure physical setting for raising children, at least compared to many other contemporaneous societies. And the very presence of those delightful toys tells us that childhood was not just about survival. It was also about play learning and imaginative engagement with the world. The enduring human quest to guard new life, to welcome it with hope, to shield it from harm, and to weave it into the fabric of family and community. These are universal themes that undoubtedly resonated just as deeply in the brick-lined homes of Mohenjo-Daro as they do in our own lives today. The strange rituals we have imagined, the forbidden things we have pondered, were their culturally specific ways of addressing these timeless human concerns. What seems peculiar to us from our distant vantage point was for them a meaningful and necessary part of making sense of the world, of managing risk, and of affirming the preciousness of each new beginning. The ultimate reasons for the gradual decline and eventual abandonment of the great Indus cities around 1900 BCE, and the precise nature of the complex societal transformations that followed, leading into the subsequent Chalcolithic and early Iron Age cultures of the subcontinent, remain one of the most significant and actively researched unresolved questions in all of South Asian archaeology. With numerous theories proposed, including climate change shifts in river courses, internal societal decay, epidemic disease, or the impact of new migrating or invading groups, but no single universally accepted explanation has yet emerged. As these cities slowly faded their unique ways of life, their specific rituals for guarding their newborns also receded into the realm of forgotten knowledge, leaving behind only those tantalizing material clues for us to ponder. A quirky or fringe tidbit that always brings a touch of human immediacy to these ancient silent people is the famous little bronze statuette of the dancing girl found at Mohenjo-Daro. She stands there poised and confident, her slender limbs full of life and movement, a tiny masterpiece of Bronze Age artistry. She makes one wonder about all the other human stories. The songs that were sung, the dances that were danced, the personal expressions of joy, grief, and creativity that are now almost entirely lost to us from this remarkable civilization. What protective charms did her mother place around her cradle? What name was whispered into her infant ear? What lullabies soothed her to sleep by the banks of the Indus? So, as we gently draw the curtains on our sleepy exploration of Harappa's hush area, we are left with a profound sense of wonder, a deep respect for this ancient and enigmatic people, and a quiet acknowledgement of the enduring mysteries that still surround their lives, and particularly their ways of welcoming and guarding their newest members. They didn't leave us a clear written instruction manual for their specific baby rituals, but they did leave us their magnificent, well-ordered cities, their beautiful, perplexing seals with those charmingly grumpy-looking unicorns, and a profound, overarching sense of, wow, they were incredibly organized. And also, what on earth were they actually thinking about when they meticulously carved that tiny clay cart? And what did that specific squiggle above the bowl really mean? The mystery, in many ways, is half the quiet, sleepy fun. The great brick cities of the Indus Valley, Mohenjo-Daro, and Harappa now shimmer and fade Egeria, receding into the warm, dusty haze of a very distant Bronze Age dawn. The enigmatic unicorn seals the serene terracotta mother goddesses, the silent, undeciphered script. All these tantalizing fragments of a lost world now gently dissolve from our sleepy view. We have wandered through their well-planned streets, peered into the imagined interiors of their homes, and tried to reconstruct, with gentle speculation and a deep respect for the unknown, the peculiar rituals and sacred safeguards that might have surrounded the arrival of their precious newborns. From the first purifying touch of sacred river water, through the embrace of woven comforts, and the silent watch of clay guardians, to the profound enigma of names whose sounds and meanings are now lost to us, we have glimpsed a society that, for all its mysteries, undoubtedly cherished its children and sought to protect them with every means at its disposal, practical ritual, and perhaps in ways we can no longer fully grasp but magical. The strange customs and forbidden things we have pondered were their heartfelt attempts to navigate the perilous journey of early life, to ward off unseen dangers, and to weave each new soul securely into the fabric of their remarkable and remarkably orderly civilization. As the last echoes of imagined Harappan lullabies fade into the quiet of your own approaching sleep, may you carry with you a sense of wonder for these ancient people, a gentle appreciation for their lost world, and a peaceful understanding that the human quest to guard new life in all its fragility and all its promise is a story as old as deep and as enduring as the great rivers that once nurtured their forgotten cities. The silence of Harappa still holds its secrets, but the enduring mystery of life's beginnings continues to whisper to us across the millennia.